Not just another rumor or political promise, it's real, confirmed, and already being paid out. We're talking about massive Social Security changes that are not only putting thousands of dollars into people's hands right now, but also increasing their monthly income permanently. Yes, you heard that right. If you were eligible for the average $6,000 back payment recently sent out, your benefits are now going up every single month. This is not speculation, this is happening, and today, I'm going to break down every part of it: the retroactive lump sum, the monthly increase, how to know if you qualify, and what steps, if any, you need to take. So let me ask you something right now. Could you use an extra $6,700? Or maybe $7,000? Because that's the kind of money that's been quietly landing in bank accounts, without an application, without red tape, just showing up, automatically. Welcome back. If you're new here, I'm your trusted guide, and today's update might be the most important one yet, because Social Security is not just changing, but making the system better for the future, because it's not just one time you'll receive ongoing monthly increase. Yes, you heard it right. This is a lifetime fix, not just a one-time payment, and this money is yours. No strings, no penalty, no clawback. Just long overdue justice for people who gave years, often decades, of their lives to public service, only to have their Social Security benefits reduced unfairly. Well, this sounds all well and good, too good to be true, but what's the reality? Don't worry, it's true, it's official, straight up coming from Social Security Administration. It's signed and done deal. People are getting the benefit, but are they taxable? Is the most important question many people are asking me in the comments below. We'll be going to answer that in detail, addressing some of the common questions from the community as well. Some folks have been messaging us, I didn't get mine yet, am I still included? The answer is yes. If you're eligible, your payment is being processed, but they are rolled out in phases. Let's address some of the top concerns. We pay to access this benefit. It's a scam. Run. Don't give out personal info. The only way to check your status is through the official Social Security portal, not by phone, not on social media. Let me say this loud and clear. You don't need to apply. You don't need to fill out any forms. You don't need to call anyone. This is automatic, as long as you were affected by the now repealed rules. Now, a quick note on what's coming next. Because while this is a one-time catch-up payment, your monthly benefits are going up, and this boost is permanent. That means every month from now on, you'll see a bigger deposit, and with COLA coming next January, that bump gets even bigger. It builds. This is the kind of snowball you want. More in July, more in August, more into the new year. And Congress isn't done. There's already talk of a possible savings supplement, a tiered monthly benefit increase based on income. Nothing official yet, but lawmakers are feeling the pressure. They know fixed income isn't enough. They know seniors are struggling. Rent is up, insurance is up, food is up, and this is just the beginning of change. This isn't just a typical update. This is a financial lifeline. If you're on Social Security, SSDI, or low income, I want you to listen very closely, because this could be the biggest payment you see all year. It's automatic. It's already approved. And if you're eligible, it's already on its way. So take a deep breath, and let's walk through everything you need to know. So what's really going on? This is not a bonus. It's not a COLA. This is a retroactive back pay stemming from a major legislative change, the Social Security Fairness Act. It was passed, signed, and now it's in action. That means millions of Americans who were shortchanged for years are finally getting what they're owed. How much are we talking about? On average, it's $6,710 per person, but that's just the average. Some are getting more, and yes, it's all real, confirmed by the current acting commissioner of Social Security. The system is automatically identifying qualified recipients. You don't need to do anything, no forms, no applications, just make sure your banking info is up to date. What if you moved or changed banks? That's where delays happen. If the SSA can't confirm your payment info, you could miss the direct deposit and be shifted to a mailed check, and that could take weeks. So don't wait. Log into your MySSA account and make sure everything is correct. Let's rewind a bit. Earlier this year, over $17 billion in retroactive Social Security payments started going out. That's billions with a B. This was the result of the Social Security Fairness Act, signed into law on January 5, 2025. This law repealed two major provisions that had been hurting millions of retirees for decades: the windfall elimination provision and the government pension offset. These two rules unfairly reduced benefits for people who worked in public service: teachers, postal workers, police officers, firefighters. They all paid into Social Security just like everyone else, but because they also earned a public pension, their benefits were cut. That wasn't just unfair, it was wrong, but finally, Congress fixed it. So what happened? A one-time payment, retroactive, covering back to January 2024, was issued to about 2 million people, the average? Around $6,700. And yes, some people received more, but here's the kicker: that lump sum wasn't the end, it was just the beginning. Because now, moving forward, those same people are receiving more money every single month. On average, about $360 more in their Social Security check. That's over $4,300 a year, and it's permanent, every month, for life. This isn't a temporary stimulus. This is a structural change, a correction, not a handout. It's money you earned, and now, finally, you're getting it. So let's be clear: if you were impacted by WEP or GPO, and if you've already received the back payment, your monthly benefit has gone up too, automatically. No application, no waiting list, no forms, no paperwork. Just a higher amount, deposited like usual, every month. If you're not sure, now's the perfect time to log into your My Social Security account and check. You might already be seeing higher deposits without even realizing it. And it gets better. This monthly increase is on top of the cost of living adjustment, or COLA, which is added every January. That means future COLA increases will be calculated on top of your new, higher base. So you're not just getting a raise now, you're getting even more every year moving forward. Think about what that means. Let's say your benefit just went up by $360. That's already huge, but next January, COLA might add another 2 or 3%. That will now be calculated off the higher base, which means even bigger increases. Now let's pause here and talk about what this money actually does for people, because we're not just talking about numbers, we're talking about lives changed. That $360 can mean the difference between affording groceries or skipping meals. It can help cover prescriptions or co-pays you've been putting off. It can finally help pay off a credit card bill that's been hanging over your head. It might even mean enough gas in the car to visit your grandchildren. This isn't luxury, this is dignity, this is breathing room, this is justice. And here's the beautiful part: you don't need to apply. The Social Security Administration is handling this automatically. They've updated your record based on the law. If you qualify, you're getting paid. No hoops to jump through, no phone calls, no forms. Now, let's clear up some common questions before we continue. What if I didn't receive a lump sum yet? Don't panic, your case might still be under review. These are being processed manually and in waves, so as long as you qualify, it's coming. And yes, if you get the back payment, you also get the monthly increase. Now, let's talk payment delivery. Direct deposit is the fastest method. If your bank account is already linked to your benefits, that's where the money is going. If you're on a Direct Express card, it will load there. And if you receive paper checks, well, it's going to take a little longer, but the money is still coming. Payments are going out based on when your info was verified and when your recalculations were completed. Important side note here: this money is not taxable. That's right, the full amount is tax-free. And no, it won't count against your SNAP, Medicaid, or housing benefits. This is pure relief, and it doesn't impact your other support systems. So here's what you can do right now. Log into your MySSA account, check your payment history, look for anything marked as retroactive, correction, or recomputation. That's how these back pay deposits are being labeled. You might not even realize it landed already unless you go check. Also, check your bank account or your Direct Express card. Many people have already noticed deposits appearing quietly, sometimes without even a formal notification from SSA. Now let's talk about payment methods. If you're on direct deposit, that's the fastest and most reliable way to get your funds. That money goes directly into your account, no delays, no mailing issues, no waiting. If you use a direct express card, your payment will load automatically, just like your regular monthly benefit. But if you receive paper checks, please be patient. These take longer, and they're sent out by mail in batches. Depending on where you live, it might take 5 to 10 business days after the date it's issued to reach you. And here's a big one: if you moved recently, or changed banks, or had a name change, make sure that information is updated, because if SSA tries to deposit your payment and it bounces, you'll be moved to paper check, which adds another delay. Let's move on to something I know is on your mind: eligibility. Now remember this: you do not need to apply. The SSA is using your current records. That means if you qualify, they already know. These payments are being calculated automatically, based on your benefit history. What if I'm not sure whether I was impacted by WEP or GPO? Check your My SSA portal or contact the SSA directly. But here's a tip: if you worked in public service and had your Social Security benefits reduced because of a public pension, you were probably affected. What if I didn't receive any increase? You might not have been impacted by the WEP or GPO rules. In that case, you won't receive the back payment or the monthly bump, but you will still get COLA increases every year. What if I moved? Changed banks? Switched accounts? Easy, just make sure your information is updated in the My SSA portal. That's the only step you need to take. And let me say this again: no one from SSA will ever ask you for your Social Security number, bank info, or a payment over the phone. If anyone does, it's a scam. Hang up, delete the message, and report it. Your money is coming directly from the official source, no one else. Let's now talk about how and when this monthly increase shows up in your bank account. If you're on regular Social Security, that includes retirement or SSDI, your payment date depends on your birthday. If your birthday falls between the 1st and 10th of the month, you'll get paid on the 2nd Wednesday. If it falls between the 11th and 20th, your deposit comes on the 3rd Wednesday. If your birthday is between the 21st and 31st, expect your payment on the 4th Wednesday. SSI recipients usually receive their payments on the 1st of each month, unless that day falls on a weekend or holiday, in which case the payment is deposited on the business day before. No matter your group, your increased monthly benefit will follow your existing payment schedule. That means if you're used to seeing your payment on the 3rd Wednesday, you'll still see it then, just a higher amount. The extra money will show up in the same method you've always used, whether that's a direct deposit to your bank account, a direct express card, or a paper check. For those getting checks by mail, remember they can take 7 to 10 business days to arrive. If you're living overseas, don't worry, you're still eligible. International banking delays can happen, but the increase still applies. Just be sure to update your banking and address information through the SSA portal to avoid any problems. And here's more good news. For most people, this monthly increase is not taxable, unless you have significant additional income, say, investments or a large pension. Your Social Security benefits will remain tax-free. For reference, the IRS generally only taxes your benefits if your total combined income is over $25,000 as a single filer, or over $32,000 for married couples filing jointly. Even then, only part of your benefit may be taxed, not all of it. So for most retirees, this new money is truly yours, without Uncle Sam taking a slice. And it won't affect your other benefits either. If you're on SNAP, Medicaid, HUD housing, or any other income-based federal or state program, this increase will not count against you for at least 12 months. That's built into the rollout. Your rent, food benefits, or healthcare eligibility should not change. That protection is there to make sure you don't lose more than you gain. It also won't affect your Medicare premiums. Part A, Part B, and any supplemental Medicare coverage will remain the same. This extra cash won't bump you into a higher tier or trigger additional costs. Now, maybe you're wondering what this means over time. Let's do some quick math. If your benefit increased by $360 a month, that's $4,320 more per year. Over 10 years, that's over $43,000. And again, that's just from this change, not including annual COLA increases or other future legislation. And speaking of future legislation, there's more in the pipeline. Right now, Congress is discussing additional reforms to Social Security. Some lawmakers are pushing for a flat $2,400 increase for all recipients. Others are calling for new cost of living formulas that better reflect the real costs seniors face, especially for healthcare, food, and housing. There's even talk of raising the income cap so higher earners contribute more to the system, which would help keep the Social Security Trust Fund solvent and strengthen the program for future generations. So stay tuned, this monthly increase may be just the beginning. But let's not overlook what's already happened. For the first time in decades, millions of retirees, especially public servants, are finally being paid what they were owed all along, not just one check, not just a bonus, but every single month, for the rest of their lives. It's not just money, it's recognition, it's justice, it's restoring the dignity that too many were denied for too long. Imagine being a teacher, showing up every day for 35 years, grading papers into the night, guiding children, making a difference, only to be told your benefits would be slashed. That happened to thousands. Imagine being a firefighter, running into burning buildings, or a postal worker who never missed a snowstorm, or a police officer risking everything daily, then at retirement, hearing that your pension disqualified you from full Social Security. That was the reality for decades. But now, for the first time, the system is saying, we see you, we hear you, we're making it right. Now let's talk about some of the most frequently asked questions we've been hearing, and get you the clear answers you deserve. First, do I need to apply for the increase? No, you do not need to apply. The Social Security Administration is automatically adjusting benefits for those who qualify. If you were impacted by the windfall elimination provision or government pension offset and your records reflect that, your payment increase is being handled internally. No paperwork, no special form, no phone call needed. Second, what if I didn't receive the $6,000 lump sum? Don't panic. Your case might still be under review. The SSA is processing each case manually to make sure every calculation is correct. Some payments are still rolling out through the end of this month. Others may take a bit longer if your records need more verification. Third, what if I just started getting Social Security? If you only recently began receiving benefits and were not previously impacted by WEP or GPO, you might not receive the increase from this law, but you're still eligible for regular COLA increases, and you may qualify for future benefit reforms that are currently being debated in Congress. Fourth, can this increase be taken away? No, this is a permanent structural change to your benefit calculation. It's not temporary. It's not tied to an emergency act. It is built into your benefit formula moving forward, for life. Fifth, could this affect my Medicaid, food stamps, or housing? As we said earlier, for at least 12 months, no, these payments will not be counted as income when determining eligibility for most other assistance programs. That was built into the implementation guidelines to protect low-income recipients. Now, let's briefly revisit what you can do right now to make sure everything's on track. Log into your My Social Security portal at SSA.gov. If you don't have one, it's easy to set up. This is where you can see your past deposits, your new monthly amount, and confirm your banking and mailing info is correct. If you've moved recently, changed your bank, or closed an old account, update your information immediately to avoid delays. If your payment is delayed more than 3 business days after your expected date, call the SSA directly using their official contact, not a number you see on social media. Let's also address a very serious warning, because whenever new benefits are being distributed, scammers are never far behind. If you receive a phone call, email, or message on social media asking for your Social Security number, bank info, or to confirm your payment, hang up, delete the message. These are scams. The SSA will never ask for gift cards, cash transfers, or your personal data over the phone or via text. If someone claims they can speed up your payment or help you get more money, they are lying. Report them directly at OIG, SSA, Gov. Now, one last thing before we wrap up. If the person entitled to the benefit has passed away, the payment may still be valid if they were alive on or after the effective date of the adjustment. In such cases, the money may become part of their estate. The executor should contact the SSA directly for instructions, but if the person passed before the payment was approved or calculated, the amount may not be paid out. It's handled on a case-by-case basis. To sum it all up, over 2 million people are getting permanent increases. Retroactive payments are averaging $6,000 per person. Monthly boosts of $360 or more are now being deposited. These changes are automatic, tax-free, and protected. You don't need to apply, and no paperwork is required. Your other benefits are safe and won't be impacted for at least a year. This is your moment. It's long overdue, but it's here. And if you've been waiting, watching, and wondering whether your Social Security benefits would ever reflect the true value of your contributions, this is that change. Let's now take a moment to reflect on why this matters so much, not just in terms of money, but in terms of justice. For decades, public servants who gave their lives to education, law enforcement, emergency response, and federal or state service were told that their pensions made them less deserving of full Social Security benefits. That message was wrong. The windfall elimination provision and government pension offset weren't just technicalities. They were policies that erased decades of work for millions of people. This recent change is a correction, and one of the most powerful examples in recent years of the government saying, "We hear you, we acknowledge the mistake, and we're fixing it." So when you see that higher deposit in your account this month, or next month, remember, this isn't a bonus, it's not charity, it's not generosity, this is earned, this is yours, and it's about time you received it. Let's talk about how this update is already changing lives. Some of you have written in the comments to say, "I was finally able to catch up on my electric bill. I got to take my grandkids out for a meal, something I haven't done in years. I bought new eyeglasses and paid for my prescriptions without borrowing." These aren't luxuries, these are the basics, things everyone deserves, especially after a lifetime of service and sacrifice. And what's more, this new baseline, this $360 per month increase, will grow every year. Your COLA will be applied on top of this new amount. That means the boost you just received will help you earn even more in future adjustments. The snowball effect is real, and it's working in your favor. But let's not stop here. While this change is monumental, there are still millions of Americans on fixed incomes, SSI recipients, disabled veterans, widows, low-income retirees, who are still barely scraping by. Rent is up, food costs are up, insurance is through the roof. Which is why new proposals in Congress, like the $2,400 across-the-board benefit increase, matter so much. It's why advocates are pushing to update how COLA is calculated to reflect real inflation seniors experience. And it's why we will continue covering every new update, every new bill, and every potential relief option that may help you, your family, and your community. But right now, if you are one of the over 2 million people receiving this permanent boost, I want you to hear this loud and clear. This is your victory. You waited, you fought, you endured, and now, it's finally your time to breathe a little easier. So what can you do right now to keep yourself, and others, informed and prepared? Stay subscribed and check our channel regularly for updates. We'll keep you posted on every new SSA announcement, reform proposal, and payment detail. Share this video with someone you know, especially public servants and retirees who may not realize they qualify. Leave your questions in the comments, we read them. You've heard me say this before, But it's worth saying again, this is more than a payment, it's recognition, it's respect, it's long overdue fairness. You shouldn't have to beg for what you've earned, you shouldn't have to fight just to be seen, and now, with this update, a major wrong has finally been made right. But we're not done, not by a long shot. Stay with us, because we're going to keep shining a light on what matters most to you. So number 1, log into your MySSA portal, check your info. Number 2, stay informed, watch for updates. Number 3, help others, share this video, leave a comment, let us know when your payment lands, let's celebrate those victories together. This is your money, this is your time, this is your moment. Stay with us, we'll be right here, watching every update, breaking it down, guiding you every step of the way. Thanks for being here, stay safe, stay strong, and we'll see you again very soon. Until then, take care.
Have you heard the news that's changing everything for millions of Americans on Social Security? This isn't a proposal. This isn't a rumor. This is real, confirmed, and already happening. If you've received your retroactive payment, listen closely, because your monthly check is now going up permanently. Yes, you heard that right. A massive benefit increase is already in motion, one that could add over $360 a month to your income, and, for some, even more than $1,000 every single month moving forward. This isn't a temporary stimulus or a short-term boost. This is permanent. And the best part? You don't have to apply for a thing. Are you one of the 3.2 million Americans already receiving this increase? Or are you still waiting for that life-changing deposit to land in your account? Let's break it all down so you know exactly what to expect, and how this might be the most significant payment adjustment you've ever received. Welcome back, friends. Whether you're returning or new here, I'm so glad you're with us today, because what we're talking about is not just another routine Social Security update. It's one of the most important corrections in Social Security history, one that affects retired teachers, postal workers, police officers, firefighters, and so many public servants who gave decades of their lives to serve their communities. Why now? Because inflation is still climbing. Groceries cost more. Utilities are sky high. Rents are breaking records. And for too long, people living on fixed incomes have been asked to stretch dollars that just don't go far enough anymore. But this isn't just about inflation. It's about justice. The Social Security Fairness Act, signed into law on January 5, 2025, finally repealed two deeply unfair policies: the windfall elimination provision, or WEP, and the government pension offset, also known as GPO. These outdated rules punished millions of people who had public pensions by cutting the Social Security benefits they earned. That injustice has now been reversed. Let's talk about what this really means. If you were impacted by WEP or GPO, and many of you watching were, you may have already received a large one-time retroactive payment. On average, that deposit was $6,710, with some people receiving up to $24,000 depending on when those penalties started. These payments were sent out between February and March of 2025, and they covered back pay all the way to January 2024. But that lump sum wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning. Starting in April 2025, Social Security began issuing ongoing monthly benefit increases for everyone who qualified. These monthly increases are permanent. They're not a bonus. They're not a COLA. This is a structural correction to your benefit calculation. You are now receiving the full amount you were always supposed to get. No games. No gimmicks. Just what's fair. For most beneficiaries, this means around $360 more each month. But in some cases, that number is much higher, over $1,000 for those with the largest adjustments. This is a lifelong increase. You'll receive this boost every month going forward, and future COLA increases will be stacked on top of this new base amount. So let's recap quickly. If you received the one-time lump sum, congratulations. That means you were affected by WEP or GPO, and the system is now correcting your benefit. If you haven't seen the monthly increase yet, check your next deposit closely. It may already be higher than it used to be. And if you're still waiting, don't panic. Social Security is processing these changes in batches. Some complex or manual cases may take until November 2025 to complete, but the increase is coming. Now, you're probably asking the big question: who exactly qualifies for this? Here's what you need to know. You may be eligible if you receive a public pension from non-Social Security covered work, such as CSRS federal retirement, state/local government pensions, or certain educator pensions. And you also paid into Social Security from other jobs and receive a Social Security benefit, either your own, a spouse's, or a survivor's. This includes retired public workers, surviving spouses of public workers, dependent children in some cases. According to the latest SSA data, this applies to over 2.1 million retirees, about 770,000 spouses and survivors. That's more than 3.2 million Americans who are now receiving corrected, higher monthly payments. And here's the best news. You don't have to do anything to claim this increase. The Social Security Administration has automatically updated your records and adjusted your payment. If you're eligible, your higher check is already on its way. No forms, no calls, no wait lists. But what if you haven't received anything yet? Now let's get into the part everyone wants to know. When exactly will you receive your payment? How will it show up? And what do you do if it's not there yet? Here's how the Social Security payment schedule works. If you're on Social Security Retirement or SSDI, your monthly payment date depends on your birthday. If your birthday is between the 1st and 10th, your payment arrives on the second Wednesday of the month. If your birthday falls between the 11th and 20th, it comes on the third Wednesday. If your birthday is between the 21st and 31st, your check is scheduled for the fourth Wednesday. If you're on SSI, Supplemental Security Income, you usually receive your payment on the first of the month. But if the first falls on a weekend or holiday, you'll often get your payment the business day before. Now, this new monthly increase, if you're eligible, will follow your existing payment schedule. That means you'll see it arrive on the same day you usually get paid, just with a higher amount. Where will it show up? That depends on how you currently receive benefits. If you're using direct deposit, that's the fastest and most secure method. The increased amount will show up in your bank account automatically. If you're on a Direct Express card, the boost will be added just like your usual deposit. If you receive a paper check, it will arrive by mail, but paper checks do take longer. Expect up to 7 to 10 business days after the payment date. For those living outside the U.S., international banking systems can sometimes cause small delays. But don't worry, your eligibility is the same. Just be sure your address and bank account info are up to date in the SSA portal to avoid issues. Still haven't received your payment? Here's exactly what you should do. First, log into your My Social Security account at ssa.gov. This is the fastest and safest way to check whether a deposit was issued. Look for entries labeled as retroactive, recomputation, or correction in your payment history. If your updated benefit doesn't appear, wait at least 3 full business days after your usual payment date. Delays can happen due to system loads or bank processing times. Still nothing after 3 days? That's when you should contact the Social Security Administration directly, but only through their official website or national hotline, never through third-party links or phone numbers found on social media. Now let's move into one of the biggest concerns you've asked about in the comments: taxes and impact on other benefits. Is this new monthly increase taxable? For most people, the answer is no. Social Security benefits, including this new increase, are not taxable unless your combined income is above certain thresholds. Those limits are $25,000 for single filers, $32,000 for married couples filing jointly. If your income is below those numbers, your benefits remain 100% tax-free. Even if you are slightly above, only a portion of your benefit might be taxable, not the whole amount. What about food stamps, Medicaid, or HUD housing assistance? This is where the update includes a very important protection. For at least 12 months, this monthly increase will not count as income when determining your eligibility for most federal or state benefit programs. That means your SNAP benefits, Medicaid coverage, or housing vouchers should not be affected by this new income. The law was written specifically to ensure that you don't lose more than you gain. That's a huge relief for people living on fixed incomes. Worried about your Medicare premiums? Don't be. This increase will not affect your Medicare Part A, Part B, or any supplemental plan premiums. Your healthcare coverage and costs will remain unchanged. And just to put your mind at ease, there is no clawback. No one is going to ask you to repay this money. This isn't a loan. It's not a mistake. It's a correction. And it's permanent. Let's take a moment to really understand the impact. If your monthly benefit just went up by $360, that's an additional $4,320 per year. Over 10 years, that's more than $43,000. And that's just from this change, not including your annual COLA increases. Every COLA in the future will be calculated on your new, higher benefit amount. That means even bigger raises down the line. This is the snowball effect working in your favor, and it starts now. But of course, with every new benefit rollout, there are scammers out there looking to take advantage. So let's go over a critical scam warning before we move into the next section. The Social Security Administration will never call you, email you, or message you on social media asking for your Social Security number, your bank account information, any kind of payment or processing fee, gift cards, wire transfers, or cryptocurrency. If someone contacts you saying they need any of that to release your payment or speed it up, it's a scam. Do not respond. Do not click anything. Hang up or delete the message immediately. Instead, massive new update just confirmed. You are not only getting that one-time lump sum payment, but you can now see a permanent increase in your monthly benefits. Yes, you heard that right. If you were eligible for the $6,000 average retroactive payment recently sent out by Social Security, there's even more good news ahead. That lump sum wasn't the end. It was simply the beginning of a long overdue fix, and now your benefits are going up every single month moving forward. This is not speculation. This is confirmed, official, and it's already happening. Let's get right into it. The $17 billion in retroactive payments you've been hearing about were issued as part of a long-fought legislative victory, the Social Security Fairness Act, signed into law on January 5, 2025. That legislation repealed two devastating provisions: the windfall elimination provision, WP, and the government pension offset, GPO. These rules unfairly penalized public sector workers like teachers, police officers, firefighters, postal workers, and more by slashing the Social Security benefits they had rightfully earned. These Americans paid into the system, just like everyone else, but for decades their benefits were reduced simply because they also received a public pension. That injustice has now been reversed. Now, the one-time lump sum payment you may have received, roughly $6,000 per person on average, was to make up for past underpayments from January 2024 through the first half of 2025. But the real headline here is that it doesn't stop there. From this point forward, if you were part of that group affected by WP or GPO, your monthly Social Security benefits have been permanently increased. This is a correction, not a gift. This is money you earned, and now, finally, it's being paid in full. Not just retroactively, but going forward every single month. For many of you, this monthly increase could add as much as $360 or more to your benefit check. This isn't a temporary boost. This is a structural change baked into your benefit calculation, and it will continue every month for the rest of your life. That means if you're receiving Social Security retirement, SSDI, or are a qualified survivor or dependent of someone impacted by these repealed provisions, you could be seeing a significant improvement in your financial stability. And let me be clear, you don't have to apply for this new monthly increase. Just like the retroactive payment, this benefit correction is being handled automatically by the Social Security Administration. There's no paperwork, no forms, no waiting list. If you're eligible, you'll see the change in your benefit amount automatically. In fact, many of you may already be noticing higher deposits in your account. If you haven't checked yet, this is the perfect time to log into your My Social Security account and review your payment history. This increase is in addition to the annual COLA, cost of living adjustment, which continues to be calculated and applied every January. So if you're thinking, will this affect my COLA? The answer is no. In fact, this means you'll benefit even more over time, because future COLA increases will apply on top of this new, higher base benefit. Think of it as a compounding win. Also keep in mind, if you delay taking your retirement benefit beyond full retirement age, your monthly benefit can go even higher, up to $5,108 per month in 2025 for those who qualify and wait until age 70. That's a significant figure, and now with the WP and GPO removed, more Americans can access the full amount they are rightfully owed. The bottom line is this: after decades of unfair cuts, the government has finally stepped in to make this right. You worked hard, you paid into the system, This is not a handout. It's your money, your earned benefit, and your dignity being restored. And it's not just a one-time fix. This is a lifelong benefit adjustment. You will continue to receive the higher payment every single month for the rest of your life. And what does this mean for your future? This increase could be the extra money you need for covering prescriptions or copays, putting a little more food on the table each week, paying off small debts, keeping your home warm or cool depending on the season, even just having a small cushion in your budget for emergencies. For many of you, this change can truly be life-changing. We understand how difficult things have been, with the cost of food, rent, utilities, and medical care all on the rise. You've been asked to do more with less for far too long. This increase, while overdue, is a meaningful step in the right direction. But understandably, many of you still have questions. Do I qualify? How do I know if my benefit is going up? What if I didn't get the lump sum while I still get the monthly increase? We'll walk you through all of that, step by step. Just know this. If you were previously affected by WP or GPO, and you've now received a retroactive payment, you are also set to receive the monthly benefit increase going forward. And if you're unsure, check your next payment amount, look for the change, and remember, you don't need to do anything. This is your benefit. You've earned it. Now it's time you get every dollar you deserve. Let's take a moment and think about what this really means, not just in terms of numbers, but in terms of lives changed. For years, for decades, in fact, many Americans who dedicated their lives to service, such as teachers, firefighters, postal workers, and police officers, were unfairly penalized under outdated rules like the windfall elimination provision and government pension offset. These policies reduced or outright eliminated their Social Security benefits simply because they served in the public sector and had their own pensions. Imagine giving 30, 40 years of your life to your community, walking into danger, educating children, sorting mail through blizzards, working overtime, putting others first, only to retire and be told, sorry, you won't get the benefits you earned. That wasn't just frustrating. It was demeaning. It was wrong. But now, finally, the system is correcting itself. And this isn't just a check in the mail. It's a form of recognition. It's dignity restored. It's a message from the government, from all of us, saying, we see you, we value your service, and we're going to make it right. These retroactive payments are a form of financial justice, but more importantly, the ongoing monthly increase, yes, you heard that right, every single month going forward, is a promise that you won't be overlooked again. The monthly boost of around $360 on average is not a favor or a bonus, it is rightfully yours, and it comes on top of any cost of living adjustment, COLA, increases you receive each year. Now just imagine what an extra $360 a month can do. That could mean finally covering that prescription you've had to skip, turning off the heat versus groceries debate every winter, visiting a grandchild without worrying if the tank is full, paying off lingering debt that's been keeping you up at night, putting healthy food on the table, not just canned goods or dollar items, or just breathing easier knowing you have a little more margin to live. We're not talking about luxury, we're talking about basic dignity, and it's long overdue. And here's what's especially powerful. You don't need to fill out a form. You don't need to apply. You don't need to jump through hoops, because this isn't some benefit lottery. It's your right. You paid into the system. You earned it. Now it's time for the system to pay you back consistently. And here's more good news. The Social Security Fairness Act that triggered these changes may only be the beginning. There are ongoing discussions in Congress right now about further Social Security reform. Some proposals include a $2,400 across-the-board boost for all Social Security recipients, raising the income cap so wealthier earners contribute more to keep the trust fund strong, enhancing COLA calculations to better reflect the true inflation seniors face, especially with rising healthcare costs. That means more help could be coming, but this current change, this ongoing monthly boost, is already active. It's here, and it's real. But we know with every major change comes a flood of questions and concerns. That's why I'm here, not just to deliver the headline, but to walk with you through every step of this. I've read the fine print, I've studied the legislation, and my goal is to help you not just hear about these benefits, but to actually receive them, understand them, and use them for your well-being. So if you're confused, don't worry, you're not alone. Many people are still wondering, why didn't I get a lump sum? Will I qualify for the monthly increase? How do I know how much more I'll be getting? Will this affect my other benefits? Do I need to do anything to keep receiving this money? We'll be addressing every one of those in more upcoming videos, and if you leave a comment. But let me answer a few of the big ones right here, right now. If you already received a retroactive payment, it means you're in the group who will continue receiving higher monthly payments. If you didn't get a lump sum, don't panic. It could be that your case is still processing, or you weren't directly impacted by the WP or GPO rules, but your standard benefits may still go up due to COLA or other reforms in progress. And if you're unsure, check your benefit details in the My Social Security portal at SSA.gov or call the SSA directly if you need a personal answer. Now, I want to speak directly to you, to those who feel forgotten, overlooked, or like the system has passed you by. You matter. Your life's work matters, and this update is just one step in the long overdue movement toward equity and retirement. You deserve to live with peace, security, and respect. And if this update helps you even just a little to rest easier, to breathe deeper, then it's already worth it. But it's not the end of the journey. We'll keep pushing. We'll keep watching legislation. We'll keep fighting for seniors, for the disabled, for veterans, for the low income, for everyone who depends on these programs to survive and live with dignity. Now let's dive deeper into who exactly qualifies for this incredible monthly increase and what you can expect next. If you've ever been affected by the windfall elimination provision, WP, or the government pension offset, GPO, this update was made for you. These rules, until now, unfairly reduced or even eliminated Social Security benefits for millions of hardworking public servants. That includes teachers, police officers, firefighters, postal employees, and other state and federal workers, especially those who earned a pension through their government job while also qualifying for Social Security through other work. If that's you or someone you love, this monthly increase is not only approved, it's already being sent out. The Social Security Administration confirmed that over 2 million people were impacted and are now receiving their full corrected benefits, going forward month after month. And here's another critical piece of information. The retroactive lump sum payment many received earlier this year, some as high as $6,000 or more, covered unpaid benefits dating all the way back to January 2024. The government didn't just start the fix from the day the law was signed. They went back in time and made it right. That's what led to the big deposit many of you saw land in your accounts recently. But again, the story doesn't end there, because the monthly benefit going forward has been increased permanently for those same recipients. That's right, ongoing monthly increases, not a one-time check. So how much more are you actually going to get? While it will vary based on your work history and individual benefit formula, the average increase is estimated to be around $360 per month. That's $4,320 more every year, added to your regular Social Security payments and on top of any future COLA increases. Over the next 10 years, that's more than $43,000 in additional income for many beneficiaries. And again, this happens automatically. No application, no phone calls, no waiting in line. And here's something important to remember. You do not need to do anything to claim this money. If you were eligible, Social Security has already identified you through their updated benefit formula. You don't have to call, email, or apply. In fact, if anyone contacts you claiming you need to do something or send money to get your payment, that is a scam, and you should hang up or delete that message immediately. The Social Security Administration will never ask for gift cards, wire transfers, or personal information over the phone. Now, let's talk about how and when you'll receive your ongoing monthly increase. If you've already been receiving your regular Social Security payments, you likely know that the date your check arrives depends on your birthday. Asterisk, if your birthday falls between the 1st and 10th, your payment typically arrives on the 2nd Wednesday of each month. Asterisk, if your birthday falls between the 11th and 20th, it's the 3rd Wednesday. Asterisk, and if your birthday is between the 21st and 31st, your deposit shows up on the 4th Wednesday. SSI recipients, on the other hand, usually receive their payments on the 1st of the month. unless that falls on a weekend or holiday, in which case it may arrive the business day before. Whatever group you fall into, your increased monthly payment will follow the same schedule. It will appear in your usual deposit method, whether that's a direct deposit to your bank account, a direct express card, or even a paper check. Though paper checks can take 7 to 10 business days longer to arrive. If you're living outside the U.S., payments may be slightly delayed due to international banking procedures, but rest assured, you're still entitled to the same increase. Just be sure your banking information on file is up to date. And here's more good news. These new monthly payments are not taxable for most recipients. The majority of Social Security beneficiaries will not owe federal taxes on this increased income. However, if you do have significant additional income, for example, from investments or other pensions, the IRS may tax a portion of your Social Security if your combined income exceeds $25,000 for single filers, $32,000 for married couples filing jointly. But remember, even in those cases, the new benefit increase doesn't automatically push you into taxation unless you're already close to those limits. And for those on SNAP, Medicaid, HUD housing, or other state/federal assistance programs, this increase will not count as income for at least 12 months, meaning your eligibility and benefits in those programs should remain unchanged. That's a critical protection built into the rollout to ensure you don't lose more than you gain. Also, this monthly increase won't impact your Medicare premiums or coverage. In other words, you'll keep getting all your usual benefits under Medicare Part A, Part B, and any supplemental plans, and this new money will not cause your premiums to spike. That's a huge relief for many seniors living on tight, fixed budgets. Now, let's say you're someone who still hasn't received your updated payment or didn't see the retroactive deposit. First, double-check your My Social Security account online. Sometimes a delay in processing or address verification can cause small hiccups. If your payment doesn't arrive 3 business days after your expected deposit date, that's when you should reach out to the Social Security Administration directly using their official website or national phone number. But don't worry, as long as you meet the eligibility criteria, your money is coming. And what if you're someone who recently started receiving Social Security benefits and weren't impacted by WP or GPO? You may not receive the increase, but you will still receive your regular COLA adjustment every January, and you may still be eligible for other upcoming relief programs, which we'll continue to cover. This is just one of many ongoing efforts to correct decades of unfair treatment and provide better financial support for seniors, disabled workers, and other Social Security recipients. Advocates are still pushing for more, including proposals for an across-the-board $2,400 boost and additional supplemental payments for low-income retirees. We'll keep you updated on those.
So are we getting another stimulus check? Come on, it's the question that's on everybody's mind, right? Especially if you're on a fixed income. But what if I told you the answer isn't buried in politics? It's actually hidden in plain sight, in the economic data. Today, we're going to pull back the curtain and find the one key trigger that actually makes these checks a reality. This is the big one. It's the question we're all asking. After everything we've been through, it just feels like everyone is wondering when, or even if, more help is ever going to be on the way. Well, instead of just guessing, we're going to look at the exact same signals the people in charge are watching. It's time to see what might really be coming over the horizon.
Okay, so before we can look ahead, we have to get one really important thing straight. And, it might not be what you want to hear, but believe me, understanding this is the absolute most critical piece of the entire puzzle.
And here it is. The bottom line is, it doesn't matter how many petitions get signed or how loudly people demand more help, none of that directly triggers a stimulus check. The one thing, the only thing that acts as the catalyst is the health of the U.S. economy. Period.
Now look, I know that might sound a little discouraging at first, but it's actually the complete opposite. It's empowering. It means we can stop getting caught up in all the political noise and start looking at the real data, the same stuff the policymakers are looking at. It changes everything from just, hoping for help to actually understanding the conditions that make that help necessary.
So, if it's all about the economy, what are those conditions? What should we be looking for? Well, this brings us right to the heart of what we're talking about today, the economic trigger. Let's break down exactly how this thing works.
The key idea here is something called an inverse correlation. Now, don't let the fancy term fool you. It's actually super simple. Just think of a seesaw, right? When one side goes up, the other side has to go down. It's the same here. When the health of the economy goes down, the chances of the government sending out stimulus checks goes up. They move in opposite directions. Simple as that.
Think about it. When the economy is just humming along, jobs are everywhere, businesses are growing, there's basically zero chance of stimulus. And why would there be? You don't need to stimulate an economy that's already running hot. But when things start to slow down, when the economy looks like it's heading for a recession, that's when the whole conversation in Washington completely changes.
So what exactly should you be watching for? Well, here are the big 4 signals. First, rising unemployment claims. That's a big one. When more people are losing their jobs, it's a clear sign of trouble. Then you've got slowing growth and contracting business activity, which just means companies are making less and selling less. But honestly, the real flashing red light to watch for is the Federal Reserve. When they start cutting interest rates, you need to pay attention. They only do that when they see big trouble on the horizon and want to make it cheaper to borrow money to get things going again. These are the headlines that truly matter.
And look, this isn't just some theory somebody came up with. The data shows a crystal clear, repeating pattern throughout recent American history. It's kind of undeniable once you see it.
Let that sink in for a second. Every single major recession in the modern era has led to stimulus checks. That tells us that these payments aren't random acts of kindness. They're a standard, almost predictable response to a specific crisis, a major economic downturn. The playbook is there, and they've used it again and again. Let's just walk through it. Back in 2001, the dot-com bubble burst, and we had a recession. The response? $300 checks. Okay. 7 years later, 2008, the housing market completely collapses, triggering a massive global crisis. The response? $600 checks. Then, of course, 2020, the pandemic shuts down the entire world. The response? $1,200 checks. Are you seeing the pattern here? A major recession hits, and boom, payments go out. It has happened every single time. But hold on, because if we look just a little bit closer at those numbers, something even more interesting and kind of wild starts to pop out. It's not just that they sent checks, it's the amount of money that tells a whole other story. Okay, so the first time, in 2001, the baseline was set, $300. Then in 2008, when the next big crisis hit, what happened? The amount exactly doubled to $600.
And in 2020? You already know where this is going. It doubled again to $1,200. I mean, come on, that's not a coincidence. That is a clear mathematical pattern playing out over 2 decades. Each payment was literally double the one that came before it.
All right, so now we're armed with the 2 biggest clues. We know about the economic trigger, and we've seen this incredible historical pattern. So what can we reasonably guess about what might be coming next?
This is the million-dollar question, isn't it? If we were to face another major recession in the near future, would the people in charge stick to this exact same doubling pattern that's held true for more than 20 years?
Well, if you just follow the math to its next logical step, you double $1,200 and you get $2,400. Now, let's be crystal clear about this. This is not a prediction. It's just pointing out a very curious historical trend. But it is a fascinating pattern to think about, isn't it? All of this really leads to one powerful, simple takeaway. If you want to have a real idea of what's coming, you can pretty much ignore the political shouting matches. The real answers are in the jobs reports, the GDP numbers, and what the Federal Reserve is doing. You now know exactly what to look for. The real signs that history shows us come right before these payments.
And here's one final crucial warning. When these things happen, they happen fast. I mean, think back to early 2020. In February, everything seemed pretty normal. By March, the entire world had changed. And by April, checks were already on their way. The shift from a stable economy to a crisis can happen in just a few weeks. When the dominoes start to fall, they fall quickly.
So, when you put it all together, history seems to show us that a major stimulus payment isn't really a question of if, but a question of when a recession forces the government's hand. The focus shifts away from waiting for politicians to make an announcement and toward watching the economy itself. So the real question I have for you is, now that you know what to look for, what economic signs will you be watching?
So today we're going to tackle a huge question, one that's been on everyone's mind for a while now. Is another stimulus check actually on the table?
All right, let's just get right into it, shall we? This is the big one. It's the question that keeps popping up. And while there's a ton of speculation and noise out there, the sources we've looked at point to a surprisingly clear set of conditions that would have to be met.
And here's the bottom line right up front. This isn't really about politics or promises. According to the source material, a future check depends completely on specific economic triggers. Think of it this way. If the economy gets sick enough, The government views a stimulus check as the medicine it needs to recover.
So what exactly are these triggers? What science is the government actually looking for? Let's break down the key indicators that would have to be flashing red before another payment would even be on the radar.
Okay, so the first big one is something you've probably heard of, a recession. Now that has a pretty technical definition. It means the economy shrinks for 2-3-month periods in a row. And what's really interesting is that based on recent data, the US economy actually hit this benchmark. But here's the kicker. That alone wasn't enough to get the checks rolling.
And that's because, even with a technical recession, the sources are crystal clear that the job market is the ultimate decider. This is the key, the linchpin, as one source put it. Seriously, everything hinges on whether people are working.
It all makes sense when you think about it, right? It's all connected. When people have jobs, they spend money. When they spend money, businesses do well. And of course, the government gets tax revenue. But when jobs disappear, well, that whole economic engine just starts to sputter and stall. That's why those monthly job reports are watched so incredibly closely.
So let's be super clear about the motivation here, according to the sources. It's not just about being generous. A stimulus check is a tool. It's like a shot of adrenaline for the economy. The whole point is to get you to spend that money, like right away, to kickstart that engine and get it turning over again.
Okay, so let's play this out. Let's say the economy does get sick enough and those triggers get pulled. What would a stimulus check even look like? Who would get one and for how much? Well, history actually gives us some really good clues. First off, just think about how many people we're talking about here. The last few times this happened, the checks reached a staggering 85% of the entire US population. So this isn't some small targeted program. If it happens, it's designed to be a massive, widespread event.
And based on those past rounds, the sources say you can pretty much bet that folks on a fixed income would be included. We're talking people receiving Social Security, disability, VA benefits, railroad retirement, you name it. The precedent is just so strong that it's almost a given these groups would be part of any plan.
Now for the big question, how much? The number that probably pops into your head first is $1,400, right? And that's simply because it was the amount of the very last payment that went out.
But that's not the only number floating around. There's been a lot of talk about a higher amount, maybe a nice round $2,000, which has been part of a few different proposals that have been discussed.
But here's where it gets really interesting. The sources point out this historical trend. If you actually look at the pattern, the way the payments have increased over the last few recessions, the next logical number in that sequence would actually be $2,400. Kind of makes you think, huh?
Okay, but all of this, who gets it, how much, it all comes down to the biggest question of all, when? And the timing isn't just pulled out of a hat. The sources show it's all about one thing, just how bad things get. So, the sources kind of paint two different pictures here. On one hand, you could have a mild recession, the economy takes a little dip, but then it bounces right back pretty quickly. In that case, the chances of a check? Pretty slim. But then you have the other scenario, a deep recession, the kind where the economy, as one source dramatically put it, falls off a cliff. In that situation, the likelihood of a check becomes very high.
And this brings us to what is probably the most compelling point of all. Just look at the history. Every single recession the US has had in the 21st century, in 2001, 2008, and 2020, every single time it's been followed by the government issuing stimulus checks. The pattern is, well, it's hard to ignore.
So, what does this all mean for you? What should you be watching? The source material basically says to keep your eye on three main things. First and foremost, the job market. If you see unemployment numbers start to really climb, that is the #1 red flag. Second, those GDP reports. Is the economy still shrinking? And third, watch the Federal Reserve and what they're doing with interest rates. These are the real-world signals that will tell you if another check is moving from maybe to very likely. And we absolutely have to end with a really important dose of reality here. As of right now, today, none of this is official. No new stimulus check has been approved. This is all based on analyzing economic patterns and historical data. Nothing is set in stone.
Which leaves us with one final thought to chew on. We've seen that every single recession in the last 20+ years has triggered a stimulus payment. And we see the economy is showing some clear signs of strain. So, is another check really a question of if it will happen, or is it just a question of when?
You go online and it seems like everyone is talking about one thing. Is a fourth stimulus check on the way? Well, the real answer, it turns out, isn't a simple yes or no. And it's definitely not a date on a calendar. Today, we're going to dig in and figure out what actually needs to happen for another check to even be a possibility. Okay, so this is it, right? This is the big one, the question on everyone's mind, and it's especially critical if you're on a fixed income, Social Security, SSDI, VA benefits. That hope for another payment is really, really strong. But to get a real answer, we've got to look beyond the headlines and get a handle on the economic reality of the situation. And honestly, this is the most important idea to grasp. A stimulus check isn't some scheduled payment. It's not a holiday bonus. It's an emergency tool, like a fire extinguisher in a glass case. Lawmakers don't just wake up one day and decide to send out money. Something major has to happen to force their hand. So the question isn't when, it's why. And that why? It's all about the health of the U.S. economy. So what are these big economic triggers? If you look back, every major stimulus payment we've ever gotten has been a reaction to a crisis. It's never proactive. So to figure out what might be coming, we have to learn to watch the same economic vital signs that the folks in Washington are looking at. I love this analogy because it makes it so clear when the economy, our patient, is healthy and doing well, you don't give it medicine, right? Of course not. But when it gets sick, when it slides into a recession, that's when lawmakers reach for the medicine cabinet. And that stimulus is the dose they use to try and get things moving again. The sicker the patient, well, the bigger the dose of medicine. Now, of all the vital signs they check, the job market is, without a doubt, the most critical. It's the big one. See, when people are working, money is flowing, the economy is humming along. But the second you see widespread layoffs and rising unemployment, that is a massive flashing red flag that the entire system is in trouble. That's the one thing that gets everyone's attention. And the way we measure this is with something called the official jobs report. You might hear it on the news as the non-farm payroll report. It comes out on the first Friday of every single month, and it gives us this incredibly detailed picture of what's happening with jobs all across the country. So what's actually in this thing? Well, first, it's got the national unemployment rate. Is it going up, down? That's huge. Then it tells us exactly how many jobs were created, or, and this is the scary part, how many were lost that month. It even looks at average hourly earnings. Are people's wages growing, or are they stuck? And finally, the labor force participation rate. Basically, what percentage of Americans are actually working or trying to find work? If you see all these numbers turn negative and stay negative for a few months in a row, that's the clearest sign that our patient is getting sick. And this isn't just some abstract theory. If we look back at recent history, there's an undeniable pattern. Major economic problems have been followed consistently by stimulus payments. It's like a playbook they've used over and over again. Just look at this timeline. It lays it out perfectly. Back in 2001, after the dot-com bubble burst, the government sent out $300 checks. Then you fast forward to 2008, the huge housing crisis, the Great Recession. That amount doubled to $600. And then, of course, 2020. The pandemic shuts down the entire world economy, and that first check was $1,200. See the trend? Every single time a massive economic crisis was followed by cash payments directly to the people. You see it, right? It's not just that they sent checks. Look at the amounts. From $300 to $600, it doubled. From $600 to $1,200, it doubled again. Now, look, history isn't always a perfect predictor, but that's a pretty interesting trajectory. It suggests that with each new crisis, lawmakers felt the need for a bigger and bigger dose of that economic medicine. So, does this mean the next check would automatically be $2,400? Well, not so fast. This is just us looking at a historical pattern. It's pure speculation. Any future amount would depend entirely on how bad the next crisis is. A mild recession might only call for a small check, but a really deep economic collapse, a number like this could definitely be on the table. The size of the check is always tied to the size of the problem. And that brings us to another really critical idea. It's not just about how much money, it's about how it's sent out. See, the last few rounds of checks went to something like 85% of all Americans. But there's a growing argument that maybe, just maybe, that broad shotgun approach isn't the smartest way to do it. Let's compare these two ideas. Broad relief, that's what we're used to, goes to almost everybody. The problem is, a lot of people who get it don't really need it, so they save it. That doesn't help the economy, and it can actually push inflation higher. The other idea is targeted relief. This would focus the money only on low and fixed income folks, the people who are guaranteed to go out and spend it right away on necessities. This gives you way more bang for your buck with less risk of inflation. It could even mean multiple smaller payments over time instead of just one big one. And that is the absolute fundamental truth of all of this. We have to remember this. A stimulus check is not meant to be a contribution to your savings account. The entire purpose, the only purpose, is to get you to spend it. They want that money flowing through stores and businesses immediately. Buying food, paying bills, getting your car fixed. That spending is the jolt of electricity the economy needs to snap out of a recession. Okay, so let's put this all together. Instead of listening to rumors online, here's a clear, simple dashboard of what you should actually be watching for. These are the real signals. Think of it as a three-step domino effect. First, you'd see the warning signs. That monthly jobs report would start showing really bad numbers. Month after month, job losses, unemployment taking up a lot. Second, after enough bad data, the experts would make it official. We are in a recession. And third, it's only then, when the crisis is real and undeniable, that you'd see lawmakers in Congress finally scramble to put a stimulus package together, which would probably include direct payments.
So, the bottom line, the most crucial takeaway from all of this is this. Right now, with the economy as it is, a fourth stimulus check just isn't happening. The trigger isn't an online petition, it's not a politician's promise. The only trigger is a real, measurable, and significant economic crisis, one that's bad enough to force Congress to act. Understanding this lets you see past all the noise and know exactly what to look for.
And that kind of leaves us with one last big question to think about. We've seen the stimulus playbook change over time, right? The amounts got bigger, and now we're talking about new, more targeted strategies. So as our economy keeps evolving and faces new and different challenges, how will the government's medicine have to adapt to actually keep working? Something to think about. Let's talk about stimulus checks. You know, that money that shows up in your bank account from the government during a crisis? It feels like a really modern thing. But what we're going to do today is take a deep dive into the surprisingly long, winding, 100-year story of how this idea went from totally radical to a central part of our economy.
Yeah, really. Most of us, when we hear stimulus, we think of 2008 or, of course, the recent pandemic. But the policies we see today are actually the final product of decades and decades of economic experiments, huge debates, and political battles. To really get how we got here, we have to go way back, all the way back to the beginning.
So our journey starts in the 1930s. America is in the absolute grip of the Great Depression. And this wasn't just a recession. It was a crisis so big, so deep, that it forced everyone to completely rethink what the government's job even was when it came to the economy and its own people. I mean, just try to imagine this. 1 out of every 4 people who could work couldn't find a job. The entire system was on the verge of breaking down. And that old idea that, the economy would just magically fix itself, well, that was clearly not happening. Out of that desperation, a brand new way of thinking took over. The government had to do something. And this, right here, was a revolutionary shift, a total game changer. Now, Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal didn't actually create stimulus checks, but it did something arguably more important. It established the core principle that makes them possible. The idea that the government has a fundamental duty to step in and create an economic safety net for its citizens. This was the philosophical seed for absolutely everything that came after. And this philosophy wasn't just talk. It was put into action through these enormous programs. The CCC and the WPA, they put millions of people back to work on public projects. And of course, the Social Security Act created that foundational safety net for older Americans. Now, these weren't direct cash payments to everyone, but they set a massive precedent. The government could and should pump money into the economy by directly helping people. The groundwork was officially laid.
Okay, so after World War II, America gets this huge boom of prosperity. But the painful lessons from the Depression were definitely not forgotten. This is when economists started to develop the actual theories, the blueprints, really, that would turn the New Deal's broad philosophy into a real policy toolkit.
And the most important blueprint came from an economist you've probably heard of, John Maynard Keynes. His big idea was actually pretty simple but incredibly powerful. Consumer spending is what drives the economy. So the economy is in a nosedive. The government has to be the one to jumpstart it by spending money, even if it means going into debt, to get people spending again. It's like giving the economic engine a boost. This theory would dominate the field for decades.
But as you can see, this idea took a while to evolve. The New Deal in the 30s hit the stage. Then in 1964, we see the first big test of Keynesian theory with a major tax cut. But the real breakthrough moment, that came in 1975.
The U.S. was facing another recession, and the government sent out a one-year tax rebate. They didn't call it a stimulus check, but that's exactly what it was, a direct payment to households to get them to go out and spend. The modern stimulus check had just been born. So the late 20th century became this period of trial and error, because in the 1970s, a new problem popped up called stagflation. That's where you have high unemployment and high inflation at the same time. It was a mess, and it really challenged those simple Keynesian models. It made policymakers realize they needed more sophisticated tools in their toolbox. There wasn't just one magic fix. And this led to the great economic debate of the 1980s. On one side, you had the demand-siders, the Keynesians, who said, give money to consumers, they'll spend it, and that will drive the economy. But on the other side, you had supply-side economics, which you might know as Reaganomics. Their idea was, no, cut taxes for businesses and the wealthy, they'll invest that money, build more stuff, and that will drive the economy. This fundamental disagreement about who to help, the consumer or the producer, really shaped policy for years. But eventually, the pendulum swung back to helping the consumer, but with a new, smarter twist: targeted stimulus. Economists and policymakers realize that lower-income families are way more likely to spend an extra dollar right away than wealthier families are. So the goal became, how do we get the most bang for our buck? Well, by sending money directly to the people who will get it back into the economy the fastest. This was a huge innovation, making stimulus more efficient. And that brings us right up to the 21st century. This is where all these theories, all these decades of debate got put to the test like never before. A series of massive global crises forced the government to act on a scale that was pretty much unimaginable, and the stimulus check finally truly came of age. The first huge test was the 2008 financial crisis. The response? The Economic Stimulus Act, which sent $96 billion out in checks to American households. And what was so important about this was that it was the first time that direct payments were the main tool in the rescue package. It was a pure, direct application of that targeted Keynesian theory. But as we all know, the 2008 crisis was deep, and it turned out more help was needed. So just 1 year later, in 2009, came the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. And look at that number, a staggering $787 billion. This was a much more complex package that mixed direct payments with big money for infrastructure projects and aid to state governments. They were fighting the crisis on every front. And then COVID-19 hit. The global shutdown of the economy triggered a response that was absolutely historic. We saw 3 major stimulus packages in 2020 and 2021. The direct payments alone, just the checks, totaled over $867 billion. We're talking more than 476 million individual payments sent out. The sheer scale of it was just breathtaking. And what's wild is how quickly the whole system evolved in just 13 years. You can see it right here. The payments got bigger, the targeting got way more sophisticated, going from just simple income levels to using really complex data. And the technology, it went from mostly paper checks being mailed out in 2008 to near instantaneous mass direct deposits during the pandemic. With each crisis, the system got bigger, it got faster, and it got smarter. But as the checks got bigger and the tech got better, something else changed pretty dramatically: the politics. You see, that 2008 stimulus passed with pretty solid support from both parties. It was seen as a necessary emergency response. But by 2020, you could see that agreement starting to crack. And by the time the American Rescue Plan passed in 2021, support was almost entirely down party lines. The political fight to get these massive aid packages passed has gotten way, way tougher. Okay, so after this 100-year journey, all the trial and error, all the evolution, what have we actually learned? When the next crisis hits, what are the key takeaways for policymakers? Well, our history actually gives us a pretty clear roadmap. Looking back, 5 key lessons really stand out. Number 1, timing. You have to act fast because hesitating just makes the problem worse. 2, targeting. You get more impact if you get money to the people who'll spend it the fastest. 3, size matters. A small solution for a big problem just won't work. 4, technology is a game changer. Modern systems can deliver help with incredible speed. And finally, number 5, politics. You can have the best economic theory in the world, but it doesn't mean a thing if you can't get the votes to pass the bill. And really, this quote just gets to the absolute heart of it all. When you strip away all the economic jargon and the political debates, this 100-year story has really been about one thing: finding better and faster ways to help real people get through a crisis. It's about providing some stability when everything feels like it's falling apart. So, where does the story go from here? Well, it's definitely not over. Economists are already talking about things like automatic stimulus, payments that would trigger automatically based on economic data, with no political debate needed. They're talking about digital currencies that could make payments happen literally in an instant. As our world keeps changing, you can bet the tools we use to protect our economy will keep changing too. The next chapter is already being written. Straight to the facts on stimulus money. You've got questions. Is more on the way? How much could it be? And what does it all really mean for you? Well, let's break it down nice and simple. Okay, let's just dive right into the big one, right? This is the question that's on everybody's mind. It's probably why you're here. And you know what? I'm not going to make you wait for the answer. Every time things feel a little shaky out there, this is the question that pops up. So, what's the deal? And there it is. The straight, honest-to-goodness truth is not yet. Right now, as we speak, no new federal stimulus checks have been approved. There's no bill, no money in the mail. But, and this is a really big but, that is not where the story ends. Not even close. The government has sent out stimulus money before, and the exact same reasons they did it then, well, they could definitely happen again. So the real question isn't just if, it's when, and what are the signs we should all be looking out for? So how do we spot the shift? How do we know when the conversation goes from not yet to it's coming? Well, it turns out there are some really clear signals. You can think of them like an economic weather forecast. No one's got a crystal ball, but history shows us there are specific things that happen that get politicians talking seriously about sending out more checks. So, what are these triggers? It really boils down to 4 main signals. First, you've got to keep an eye on the unemployment rate. If that number starts to creep up towards, say, 6 or even 7%, that's a huge red flag. Then there's just a general significant slowdown in the economy. The third, politics, of course. An election year always ramps up the pressure. And finally, maybe the most powerful one, public pressure. When enough people start demanding help, Washington eventually has to listen. Okay, so we know the signs to look for, but let's get down to the why. Why does stimulus checks even happen in the first place? It's not just some random giveaway. It's a very specific tool that economists use to stop a really dangerous problem, what they call a vicious economic cycle. So let's take a look at what that actually is. This right here is the dangerous downward spiral that keeps economists up at night. It's a feedback loop. See, it all starts when folks have less money in their pockets. Naturally, they stop buying as much stuff. Well, that directly hurts businesses, right? So what do? They have to lay people off. And that, of course, means even more people have less money. And you can see how the cycle just keeps feeding on itself, pulling the entire economy down. So how do you stop a spiral like that? Well, a stimulus check is designed to be like a wrench thrown into the gears of that cycle. By putting cash directly into millions of bank accounts, the government is basically hitting the reset button. The whole idea is that you'll take that money and spend it right away on things you need: groceries, gas, rent, and that spending goes straight to businesses, which helps them keep the lights on and, crucially, keep their employees on the payroll. It's all about turning that vicious cycle into a virtuous one. All right, now for the part I know you've been waiting for. If, and that's still an if, another round of stimulus happens, how much money are we really talking about here? The good news is we don't have to just pull a number out of thin air. We can actually look back at the past payments, and believe me, a very clear pattern starts to show up. This timeline really tells the whole story, doesn't it? Back in 2008, the payments were pretty modest. But look at what happened during the pandemic. They grew, and they grew significantly. We went from $1,200 in 2020 all the way up to $1,400 for every single person in a household in late 2021. The pattern is kind of undeniable. When the government decides to act, the trend has been to go bigger and bigger. Let's just sit with this number for a second. $5,600. That is what a family of 4 got in that single largest round of stimulus. Think about what that actually means for a real family. For a lot of people, that's 4, maybe 5 months of rent. That could be an entire year of car payments. It could be months and months of groceries and bills. We're not talking about a little boost here. We're talking about a genuine lifeline. It's breathing room. That's the kind of real-world impact these numbers have. So why the big jump in the payment amounts? Well, it all comes down to this kind of wonky economic idea called the marginal propensity to consume. Don't worry, it sounds way more complicated than it is. All it really means is this. If I give you an extra $1, are you more likely to spend it or save it? And what all the studies show is that people with less in savings, people living paycheck to paycheck, They spend that money like immediately. For a stimulus to work, the government needs that money out in the economy now. And that's why they go big. A $1,400 check is much more likely to get spent on immediate needs than a smaller $600 one. It's just that simple. This brings us to another super important question. If checks do go out, who actually gets one? And one of the most consistent things we've seen is that these programs tend to be incredibly broad. The whole point is to get money flowing fast, and the easiest way to do that is to include just about everybody. So here's the good news. Usually the eligibility is really, really wide. It's not just for people who are unemployed. Working folks, retirees, people on disability, they've all typically qualified in the past. The main target is the broad middle class. So unless you're a really high income earner, chances are you'd be on the list. And what about how fast you get the money? Because let's be real, if you need help, you need it now, not months from now. And thankfully, this is where the system has gotten so much better. I mean, back in 2008, it took months to get paper checks in the mail. Fast forward to 2021, and the IRS was getting money into people's bank accounts via direct deposit within days of a law being signed. That's a huge improvement. Okay, so we've talked about the why, the when, the how much, and the who. But here's the thing. You don't just have to sit back and wait to see what happens. There are actual concrete things you can do right now to make sure you're ready to go if and when another payment gets approved. Let's walk through your action plan. Look, it's a simple 4-step plan. This is all about being proactive instead of reactive. It puts you in the best possible spot. And let's kick it off with what I think is the most important practical step of all, just being ready. These 3 things seem small, but they are incredibly powerful. First, make sure the IRS has your current mailing address. More importantly, check that your direct deposit information, your bank account info, is up to date. That's the secret to getting paid in days instead of weeks. And finally, file your taxes. I know, nobody likes doing it, but even if you don't owe a dime, filing gets you into the IRS system, so any future payments can be sent to you automatically. Whew, we have covered a ton of ground here, right? We've looked at the economic signs, the history, the politics, and the practical steps you can take. So after all of that, let's circle all the way back to the beginning and ask one more time, what's the real bottom line here? And here it is, plain and simple. It really just comes down to 2 things, need and pressure. If those economic warning lights we talked about, like rising unemployment, start flashing red, the need for help will be obvious. And if enough of us are feeling that pain and make our voices heard, the political pressure will be impossible to ignore. And when those 2 things come together, history tells us that more checks become not just a possibility, but a probability. And you know, this might be the most important takeaway of all. It is so easy to get caught up waiting and hoping for help to arrive. But this idea right here, this puts the power right back where it belongs, with you. A stimulus check can be a huge help, an absolute lifeline, but it's not a long-term plan. So the real question I want to leave you with is this. What's one thing you can do this week, stimulus or not, to take control and build a stronger financial future for yourself?
What if, instead of sending checks to almost everyone, we sent out fewer checks but made them way more powerful? We're talking about ongoing, monthly payments, but, and this is the key part, only for a very specific group of people. Let's get into it.
All right, first up, let's just take a second and think back to 2020 and 2021. Remember those 3 big stimulus checks? A lot of us got them, and for some people, they were an absolute lifeline. But the big question this new report is asking is, was that really the best way to do it? Could we have gotten a bigger economic bang for our buck, with fewer negative side effects?
So the approach back then was, well, it was broad. I mean, incredibly broad. We're talking about checks going out to something like 85% of the entire U.S. population. The idea was pretty simple, right? Just get money into as many hands as possible, as fast as possible. But as this report points out, that kind of blanket approach, it came with a massive kind of hidden cost.
And what was that cost? Well, in a word, inflation. According to this study, printing and just sending out trillions of dollars to almost everyone is a huge reason we saw that crazy inflation and all the supply chain chaos. The report uses a great analogy. It was like flooding an engine. Just too much, too fast, all at once. So if that didn't work perfectly, what's the alternative?
Okay, so to really get what this new proposal is all about, we got to wrap our heads around one core economic idea. And it's actually pretty simple. It's this. Not every dollar is spent the same way. The way different people use a new dollar they get, well,
That's the whole secret to making a stimulus plan actually work.
All right, so here's the fancy economic term for it. Marginal propensity to consume, or MPC for short. Now I know, that sounds super complicated, but I promise it's not. It really just boils down to one simple question. If I handed you an extra dollar right now, what would you do with it? Would you spend it right away on groceries, gas, bills, or would you stick it in your savings account? That one little concept, that's the foundation for this whole new way of thinking about stimulus.
So this study kind of breaks people down into three main groups based on this MPC idea. First up, you've got your high MPC folks. These are generally lower income people who, look, when they get an extra buck, it's got to go right back out the door for necessities. Then you've got the medium MPC group. This is often your middle income crowd. They'll spend some of it, for sure, but they're probably going to save a good chunk of it too. And finally, you have the low MPC group. These are your high income individuals. An extra dollar for them, it's much, much more likely to get saved or invested instead of spent. So you see the pattern, right? The more money you make, the less likely you are to immediately spend the next dollar you get.
And this right here, this is really the heart of the matter. A stimulus check, it isn't supposed to be a gift. The whole point is right there in the name, to stimulate the economy. And for that to happen, what needs to happen? The money has to be spent. It has to move. And as you can see, giving a dollar to someone in that high MPC group, well, you get the most bang for your buck immediately. Over 80 cents of that dollar goes right back into the economy. That effect gets smaller and smaller with the other groups. So the bottom line is pretty clear. If you want maximum stimulus, you got to give the money to the people who are going to spend it.
Okay, so now that we've got this MPC thing down, we can look at the actual plan this report is proposing for the next time the economy takes a nosedive. And it is a radically different approach. It's laser-focused, super efficient, and, they argue, way more powerful. And the big number at the center of this whole thing? $2,000. But get this, it's not a one-time check. The proposal is for $2,000 a month, an ongoing payment designed to create real stability and a continuous flow of spending into the economy.
Now here's the crucial part. This is not for everyone. The plan is super targeted. It's aimed specifically at low-income and fixed-income folks. Think people on Social Security, disability, SSI, and VA benefits. And why them? Well, it's exactly what we just talked about. This is the high MPC group. These are the people who will take that money and, out of necessity, immediately put it back into the economy. And it's not a forever thing either. It's designed as a temporary fix, just for a few months during a really bad recession, to basically jumpstart the economic engine. So you might be asking, okay, what's the big advantage of this laser-focused approach? Well, it's simple. You get a much bigger bang for your buck, a much bigger economic impact for a surprisingly smaller price tag. It's really about being strategic, you know, instead of just dropping cash from a helicopter and hoping for the best.
Let's just compare these two approaches side by side, because this really puts it all into perspective. The old way, checks to 85% of the country, costing nearly $1 trillion. And the result, the report argues, was a ton of inflation. The new proposal, you target a much smaller group, maybe 50 to 100 million people, the ones who need it the most and will spend it the fastest. The total cost, a few $100 billion. So you get a faster, more direct boost to the economy, you help the people who are most vulnerable, and you do it all for a fraction of the cost and with way, way less risk of causing that crazy inflation.
Okay, now I have to be super clear about this next part. This is really important. As fascinating as this idea is, right now it is just that, an idea, a proposal. This is not a current government policy.
In fact, the report itself says it directly, and I'm quoting here, a $2,000 check has not been approved right now. So I just want to make sure everyone understands, this is a research paper, it's not an active program you can sign up for.
So what's the point of all this then? Well, the real value here isn't about a check that's coming in the mail tomorrow. The value is that this is a potential blueprint for the future. It's a detailed, data-driven game plan that policymakers can look at the next time we hit a big economic crisis. It's really all about learning from what happened last time so we can have a smarter, better, and less damaging response in the future.
And that really leaves us with one big final question to think about. Instead of these huge, broad, one-size-fits-all solutions, could this be the future? Is this kind of smart, targeted, data-driven support the new way we handle economic recovery? This report, for one, makes a really compelling case that it just might be.
Today, we're doing something a little different. We're not just going to talk about stimulus money. We're going to talk about strategy. We're going to turn all that uncertainty into a solid game plan so you can absolutely maximize the benefit from any economic relief program that might come your way. You know, for so many of us, getting a government stimulus check can feel, well,
it can feel like a game of chance, right? You hear some rumors, you're glued to the news, and you basically just sit there and hope for the best. It feels like it's all just luck and timing that you have zero control over. But what if I told you it's a lot more like a game of chess than just a random roll of the dice? What if by actually understanding the board and knowing the rules, you could get a serious advantage, not just in getting the money, but in making it work for you for the long haul? That is the exact game plan we are going to build together, starting right now. Okay, so here's our roadmap. First, we're going to talk about what it means to win the stimulus game. Then, we'll get into understanding the rules. After that, we'll cover proactive preparation, how to maximize what you get, and finally, how you can become a true stimulus champion. First up, winning the stimulus game. This is all about making that critical mental shift, moving from being a passive person waiting for things to happen to being an active, strategic player in control. Believe it or not, these stimulus programs follow some surprisingly predictable patterns. Getting a handle on these 4 core rules is your first and honestly your most powerful strategic advantage. So let's break them down. This right here, this demystifies the whole thing. First, timing. The money gets sent out in waves. Direct deposits are always the fastest, sometimes hitting your account within a week. But paper checks and those debit cards, that can take weeks, maybe even months. Knowing this helps you manage your cash flow. Second, amounts. They almost always follow a formula. A base amount, maybe $1,200, maybe $1,400, plus extra for any dependents. This lets you kind of sketch out a budget before you even know for sure. Third, eligibility. This almost always comes down to your adjusted gross income from your most recent tax return. That one number is what decides if you qualify. And finally, distribution. Look, having your direct deposit info updated with the IRS is the #1 best way to get paid fast. Period. These aren't secrets. They're literally the rules of the game. So knowing the rules is one thing, but actually acting on them, that's what takes us to the next super critical phase, proactive preparation. This is how you get all your pieces in place before the game even starts. It's what separates the pros from the amateurs. So this slide lays it out perfectly. There are 2 kinds of players. Which one are you? The reactive recipient waits for the news, then scrambles when they realize their check is going to an old bank account. They're always reacting to problems. But the strategic player? They anticipate. They see the writing on the wall, they keep their info updated every year just as a habit, and they already have a plan for the money before it even shows up. One is constantly playing defense, always a step behind. The other is playing offense, ready for whatever comes next. And that preparation, it's really built on these 3 pillars. Financial prep is your foundation. You've got to file your taxes every single year, even if you don't owe anything. This puts you on the grid. It makes sure they have your current info. Knowledge prep is all about intelligence gathering. You start watching for economic triggers, like a jump in unemployment or a drop in the GDP. That's just the total value of everything a country produces. These are the signals that often come before any stimulus talks. And community prep is your network. Get in touch with local nonprofits or community groups. They often know about local programs and can help you avoid scams. All right, you've played your opening moves perfectly. The money has arrived. Now, this is where the real strategy begins. How to maximize winnings isn't just about getting the check. It's about using it to create real, lasting improvement in your financial life. So, what is the smartest way to actually use this money? This framework is your guide. Notice that about half of it goes to immediate needs, food, rent, keeping the lights on, that's crucial. But the other half is for building your future. A good chunk, maybe 20 to 30%, should go to debt reduction. Attack that high-interest credit card debt first. Paying that down is like giving yourself a raise. Another 20 to 30% is for strategic investments. This could be anything from a certification class to a car repair that you need to get to work, or just starting a small emergency fund. And yeah, that last little slice for quality of life, that's important too. Reducing stress is a huge part of long-term financial health. This timeline tells you exactly when to make each move. Right now, in the pre-crisis phase, you should be making sure your info is up to date. When you see those early warnings in the economy, you start paying close attention. During the legislative debate, you start drafting your spending plan based on what they're talking about. Once a bill passes, you're in the distribution phase, verifying everything on official government sites. Once you get the money, you receipt and maximize by putting your plan into action. And then, and this is key, post-stimulus, you don't stop. You use that breathing room to keep building resilience, because these economic cycles, well, they always come back around. Okay. Finally, let's talk about the end game, becoming a stimulus champion. This isn't about just winning once. It's about adopting a mindset that lets you navigate these situations successfully every single time and maybe even help others do it too. This winning mindset really has 4 parts. It starts with being proactive, not reactive. It grows when you're strategic, thinking a few moves ahead. But what really makes a champion is being community-focused. When you share good, verified info with your friends and family, when you shut down misinformation you see online, you're making your whole community stronger. When you become that trusted source of info, that leader, you're not just helping yourself play the game better, you're helping everyone win. And really, in the end, it all comes down to this single idea. The exact same payment can be a temporary band-aid for one person, or it can be a stepping stone to real financial stability for another. The difference isn't luck, it's strategy, it's preparation, and it's choice. By playing the game smart, you can make sure that for you, it's always a tool for lasting improvement. Let's talk about stimulus checks. They're probably one of the most powerful and, yeah, one of the most controversial tools a government has in its toolkit. When a crisis hits, all of a sudden we're talking about billions, sometimes trillions of dollars meant to save the economy. But does it actually work? Today, we're going to dig into the data and get to the honest truth. And that really brings us to the core question of this whole thing. Are these checks a desperate lifeline for families who are just trying to keep their heads above water? A necessary shot in the arm for the economy? Or are they a huge liability, a short-term fix that ends up causing bigger problems down the road, like debt and inflation? It's a massive question, and the answer, well, it's definitely not simple. So you've really got 2 camps here. On one side, people are saying these checks are absolutely essential. They stop the economy from collapsing and prevent widespread suffering. On the other side, you've got critics saying they're just reckless handouts that make problems like inflation way worse. The thing is, both sides have a point. So let's unpack the data and see what it tells us. First, let's look at the case for stimulus. Because, when these programs are done right, they can be incredibly effective. So what does getting it right actually look like? The first thing, and maybe the most important factor of all, is speed. In an economic emergency, you got to think of it like being a first responder. The help has to get there right now, not weeks or months later when all the damage is already done. Getting that money into people's hands fast is absolutely critical. Just look at the CARES Act back in 2020. The law was signed on March 27th, and just 2 weeks later, only 14 days, money was already hitting people's bank accounts. For the government, that is lightning fast. And the effect was almost immediate. By May, you could see consumer spending pull out of a complete nosedive. That speed almost certainly prevented a much, much deeper economic collapse. Okay, so speed is one huge piece of the puzzle, but who gets the money? That is just as important. What we call targeting efficiency is all about making sure the stimulus goes to the people who are most likely to turn around and spend it immediately. That's what creates a real ripple effect through the economy. And this is where you can actually see that ripple effect in the data. Look at this. Households that had less than $500 in the bank, they spent almost half of their stimulus check within just 10 days. Now compare that to households with over $3,000 in savings. They spent basically nothing. It just goes to show you the exact same dollar has a radically different impact depending on whose pocket it ends up in. All right, the next piece is scale. A stimulus can be fast, it can be well-targeted, but if it's just too small, it's like trying to put out a forest fire with a water pistol. Let's compare what happened in 2008 to what happened in 2020. The 2008 checks were smaller, and the total package was only $96 billion. The general feeling now was that it just wasn't big enough for the size of the crisis. Fast forward to 2020, the CARES Act was almost 3 times that size, which was much closer to what the economy actually needed. And finally, you have to remember that stimulus checks don't work in a vacuum. The 2020 response wasn't just about sending out cash. It was a full-on, multi-pronged attack on the crisis. You had enhanced unemployment, you had support for businesses with the PPP loans, protections against eviction. All of these things were working together. A crisis hits families from every direction, so the solution has to, too. But that, of course, is only half the story. These programs have some very real downsides, and it is crucial that we understand why they sometimes fail. So, just like good timing is a key to success, bad timing can be a fatal flaw. But it's not just about being slow, it's about when the stimulus actually shows up in relation to what the economy is doing. If it arrives too late in the game, it can be almost useless. And the 2008 stimulus is really the classic example of this. The checks went out in the early summer of that year. But the absolute worst part of the crisis, the Lehman Brothers collapse, the whole market meltdown, that didn't happen until September and October. So by the time the economy was in total free fall, the impact from those stimulus checks had already vanished. The timing was just completely wrong. The flip side of getting money to the right people is, of course, getting it to the wrong people. When stimulus money goes to folks who don't really need it or aren't going to spend it, that economic impact is just massively reduced. That money is way more likely to just get saved or maybe used to pay down some debt, which doesn't really do much to stimulate immediate economic activity. And, the data from the pandemic really backs this up. High-income households, well, they saved a whopping 40% of their stimulus payments. That is a huge amount of money that was just put on the sidelines instead of being put back into the economy. It's stimulus money that isn't really stimulating much of anything. Another major reason these things can fail is the system itself. If a program is just too complicated, if it's hard to get to or difficult to even understand, it's pretty much guaranteed to fail the most vulnerable people. The very people it was designed to help in the first place. And this is where policy slams right into reality. Despite all the good intentions, an estimated 8 to 12 million eligible Americans never even got their first stimulus check. And the reasons why are pretty simple and pretty painful. No internet, language barriers, or just not having a bank account. It's a tough reminder that a program is only as good as its ability to actually reach the people who need it. And then, of course, we have to talk about the elephant in the room, inflation. The U.S. government spent around $5 trillion on pandemic relief. I mean, that is just an unprecedented amount of money. And while the debate is really complex, a lot of economists argue that pumping that much cash into the economy was basically like pouring gasoline on the inflationary fire that we all felt at the grocery store and the gas pump. So we've seen the clear wins and we've seen the clear failures. But the reality is, most stimulus policy lives somewhere in a messy gray area. It's not really about right and wrong. It's about navigating a series of incredibly difficult trade-offs.
So let me just ask you this, right? What's the better choice? Getting money out the door as fast as humanly possible, even though you know some of it's going to be messy, it might go to the wrong people or even fraudsters? Or do you take the time to build a slow, perfect system that gets every single dollar to the right person, but might show up way too late? There is no easy answer to that.
And these are the core dilemmas. This is what policymakers are constantly forced to choose between. Do you want speed or do you want accuracy? Do you want to reach absolutely everyone or only those who need it most? Do you provide generous relief right now or do you protect the country's long-term finances? Every single one of those choices means sacrificing something else.
But here's the thing. When policymakers manage to navigate these trade-offs correctly, the payoff can be huge. Studies show that for every $1 that gets into a low-income household, it actually generates about $1.50 in economic activity. That's that economic multiplier effect right there, a really powerful return on investment. And beyond the pure economics of it, there's a profound human impact here. The 2020 stimulus checks, for all their flaws, are credited with cutting the overall poverty rate by 10% in a single year. That's a staggering achievement. It literally kept millions of families, especially families with kids, from falling into poverty during a historic crisis.
So, with all of this in mind, how do we get it right the next time? Because let's be honest, there will be a next time. Here's what the lessons from the past can teach us about designing smarter stimulus programs for the future. The path forward is really about being prepared. First, we need to create automatic triggers so help goes out the second a recession hits, without all the political delays. Second, we have to invest in the basic government plumbing, the infrastructure to get money out quickly and accurately. Third, we have to design these programs from day one to balance speed with accuracy. Fourth, the approach has to be comprehensive, tackling jobs, housing, and individual support all at once. And finally, every emergency plan needs an exit strategy to make sure we're not damaging our long-term financial health.
Because ultimately, this isn't just about spreadsheets and economic models. It's about our shared responsibility when things get tough. It's about preventing suffering. The hard-earned lessons from the past have shown us what's possible, and they've shown us what can go wrong. The real question for the future isn't if we'll face another crisis, but if we'll be wise enough to build a better bridge before we actually need it.
There's a question that just keeps popping up, and I see it everywhere. Are we going to get a fourth stimulus check? It's a huge topic online, and honestly, for very good reason. So today, we're going to cut through all that noise and really look at what the economy itself is telling us. So let's just get right to it. This is the question on everybody's mind. And listen, while there's tons of speculation out there, the real answer isn't buried in some political headline. Nope. It's found in the economic data. And that's not an exaggeration. We're talking about this today because for millions of people who are really feeling the financial squeeze, this isn't just some abstract idea. It's a very real daily concern. So let's try to get some real clarity. All right, here's how we're going to break this all down. We'll start with what actually triggers these payments. Then we'll look at a pretty surprising pattern from the past. After that, we'll zero in on the one economic number you need to keep an eye on. And finally, we'll talk about why the next stimulus might look totally different from the last one. Okay, first things first. What actually causes a stimulus check to happen in the first place? It's not random, and it's not just politics. It is a direct, calculated response to one specific event, an economy that's gotten sick. And when we say the economy is sick, we're really talking about a recession. That's the official word for it, right? A major, widespread, and kind of prolonged downturn that hits everything and everyone, from big corporations to your local coffee shop. And this right here is the core idea we need to understand. If you just look back at the last couple of decades, the pattern is crystal clear. Every single major recession has been followed by stimulus checks. Every single time. It's basically become a standard move in the modern economic playbook. Here's a great way to think about it. Imagine the economy is a patient. A recession? That's when the patient gets seriously ill. The lawmakers are the doctors, and their go-to prescription is a big old injection of cash. That's the stimulus, to try and get the patient back up and running. And it makes sense, right? The sicker the patient, the bigger the dose of medicine they're going to need. So let's dig into that history a little bit, because when you actually examine the numbers from past recessions, well, a really fascinating and maybe even predictive pattern starts to show up. Okay, check this out. Back in 2001, after the dot-com bubble burst, the check was for $300. Then in 2008, during that massive financial crisis, it doubled to $600. And then in 2020, with the pandemic, it doubled again to $1,200. Are you seeing the pattern here? Now, if you just follow that doubling logic, the next number in that sequence would be around $2,400. But, and I have to be super clear about this is just an observation of a historical trend. It is absolutely not a guarantee. The actual amount of any future check would depend completely on how severe the economic downturn is at the time. So if a sick economy is the trigger, how do we know when it's sick enough for the doctors to step in? Well, there's one key health report that we can all look at. It comes out on the first Friday of every single month, and it's simply called the jobs report. And inside this report, there are a few vital signs. You've got the headline number, the unemployment rate. But just as important is jobs created or lost. Are companies hiring, or are they laying people off? The labor participation rate tells us how many people are even trying to find a job, and average hourly earnings shows if our paychecks are keeping pace with inflation. Altogether, they paint a pretty clear picture of our economic health. So when you start to see that businesses, from the giant corporations all the way down to your local pizzeria, are slowing down their hiring, or worse, starting to let people go, that is a massive warning flare for the whole economy. It means people aren't spending as much, companies are getting nervous, and the whole economic engine is starting to sputter. That is the signal that gets lawmakers to scramble and start seriously talking about what they need to do. But, and this is really important, if they do act again, there's a good chance it won't be a carbon copy of last time. The whole strategy could shift to something much more targeted. See, the last few checks were broad. They went out to a massive chunk of the population. A targeted strategy is different. It would focus laser-like on low-income and fixed-income households. Why? Because those are the folks most likely to spend the money immediately and pump it right back into the economy. This gives you way more bang for your buck, and it does it with less risk of driving up inflation for everybody else. So the big takeaway here is this. We might need to adjust our expectations. If and when another stimulus package comes along, it could be designed very, very differently. Maybe aimed at a smaller group of people to get the maximum economic impact with the fewest negative side effects. Okay, so let's just trace that path one more time. It starts with an economic contraction. We see it in those bad jobs reports. That triggers the lawmakers' scramble, where they have to respond. Then a stimulus package is passed, and finally, the payments are distributed with one single goal: to get spent right away and kickstart the economy. So that brings us to the final thought. Based on modern history, it really doesn't seem to be a matter of if the government will intervene in the next major recession, The real question is, how sick does the economy have to get before they open up that playbook once again? That's what we'll all be watching. You ever check your bank account and see a surprise deposit from the US Treasury and just think, where in the world did that come from? A stimulus check can feel like it just materializes out of thin air. But the journey it takes from being a far-off idea to actually landing in your wallet, well, that's one of the most complex, high-stakes dramas in all of Washington. It's this wild path that twists through economic theory, bare-knuckle political fights, and some absolutely incredible logistical challenges. So let's pull back the curtain and really follow the money from the first whisper of a crisis to the very moment it hits your account. All right, so here's how we're going to break it all down. We're going to trace this whole journey through 5 key stages. First, we'll look at what kind of emergency actually sparks the idea in the first place. Then, we'll meet the major players whose decisions really matter. After that, we'll dive into the treacherous legislative process a bill has to survive. We'll see how that law becomes actual cash. And finally, we'll look ahead and explore what the future of this kind of economic relief might hold. So, first things first, stimulus checks don't just get handed out on a whim. Think of them less like a, hey, here's a good idea, and more like an emergency tool. They're like the financial fire extinguisher the government only smashes the glass for when the whole economic house is on fire. These things are born from moments of serious national distress, when the normal flow of the economy is so broken that a direct, pretty drastic intervention is seen as maybe the only option left. Okay, so what does that distress actually look like? What are the specific signals Washington needs to see before the gears even start to turn on something like a stimulus plan? I can tell you, it takes a lot more than just a few bad headlines or a dip in the stock market. The economic pain has to be so widespread, so severe, that it can actually overcome the natural state of political gridlock. It has to be a genuine, you can't deny it crisis. And what's really fascinating is just how specific these triggers are. This isn't just about a gut feeling. Policymakers and economists are literally watching a dashboard of precise indicators. So when the unemployment rate starts climbing past that 6 or 7% mark, that is a huge, blaring red flag. It means millions of people are losing their jobs and their ability to spend money. Then there's the GDP, the gross domestic product, basically the total value of everything made in the country. If that shrinks for 6 straight months, 2 quarters in a row, we're technically in a recession. But really, the biggest catalysts are those seismic black swan events. Think a global pandemic like in 2020 or a massive banking collapse in 2008. These are things that shock the entire system all at once. And underneath all of that, they're watching consumer confidence. When people get too scared to spend, the whole economy can just freeze up. And that's the exact moment when putting cash directly into people's hands goes from being some theoretical idea to an urgent necessity. So once all those alarm bells start ringing, the focus immediately shifts from why we need help to who can make it happen. You see, an idea for a stimulus check is totally worthless without the key institutions and the people running them to drag it into reality. This is where the real power brokers of Washington step onto the stage, and each one has a critical part to play. You can almost think of it like a 4-part relay race. First up, you've got the president, who's like the starting runner. Now, he can't write the check himself, but he has what's called the bully pulpit, this unique power to get the entire nation's attention, propose a big plan, and put a ton of public pressure on Congress. Then, the baton gets passed to Congress, which holds the ultimate authority here, the constitutional power of the purse. No money gets spent with their sign-off. And the real heavy lifting happens in key committees, like the House Ways and Means and the Senate Finance Committees. Once they, hopefully, pass a bill, the third runner, that's the Treasury Department and the IRS, takes over. They have the absolutely monumental task of turning legal text into actual money in millions of bank accounts. And all the while, running in a parallel lane, is the Federal Reserve. They don't handle the checks directly, but their decisions on interest rates and the money supply, well, they create the entire economic environment that makes a stimulus necessary in the first place. So, the crisis is here, the key players are at the table, and an idea is starting to take shape. Now comes the hardest part, forcing that idea through this grueling obstacle course that we call the legislative gauntlet. And trust me, this is not a simple vote. It is a brutal process of negotiation, compromise, and political warfare that, frankly, most proposals just do not survive. This whole journey is just a series of make-or-break hurdles. It all kicks off with a formal proposal, which might come from the White House or from members of Congress themselves. That proposal gets sent immediately to a committee for review. And this is really the first kill point. If it makes it out of committee, it moves to the floor of the House or the Senate for a full debate and a vote. But here's the tricky part. Both the House and the Senate have to pass the exact same bill. This is what often forces a conference committee, where leaders from both sides get in a room to hammer out a compromise. Only if they can agree does a final bill land on the president's desk for a signature, which then finally kicks off that last step, implementation.
You know those grand speeches you see on TV, on C-SPAN? Forget about them. Most of that is just for show. The real nitty-gritty work of making a law happens right here, in the committee rooms. This is where the messy, unglamorous sausage-making takes place. Lawmakers debate every single tiny detail. Should the check be $1,200 or $2,000? What's the income cutoff for who's eligible? Do kids count? And if they do, for how much? Amendments are proposed, experts are brought in to testify, and the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office comes in and slaps a price tag on the whole thing. It is a meticulous and often brutal process where the final bill is really forged.
But there is one force that's powerful enough to blast through all this gridlock: overwhelming public opinion. During the pandemic, support for direct payments was consistently over 70%. I mean, that is a staggering number in a country as divided as ours. When a policy is that popular, it creates a political tidal wave. It gives politicians cover to vote yes, even if they have some private worries about the cost or the details. No elected official wants to be the one seen voting against sending direct help to their constituents when a massive majority is demanding action. Public pressure becomes the ultimate lubricant for the rusty gears of Washington.
Okay, so the bills survived the gauntlet. The president's signature is on the paper. The political fight in Washington is finally over, right? Not even close. Now a totally different kind of war begins, a logistical battle against time, technology, and pure complexity. It's the sheer nightmare of getting money from the U.S. Treasury into the hands of over 100 million Americans. And what's really remarkable is seeing the government's steep learning curve in action. If you look back to 2008, that whole process dragged on for about 2 months. But then, flash forward to 2020. Faced with the crazy urgency of the pandemic, that massive CARES Act went from a proposal to a law in about 3 weeks. I mean, that is just unprecedented speed. And by 2021, the system had become this well-oiled machine. The law passed quickly, and payments started hitting bank accounts almost instantly. What that really reflects is a huge behind-the-scenes investment in the digital infrastructure needed to move massive amounts of money fast. But fast definitely does not mean easy. I mean, think about it. The IRS has to sift through data for tens of millions of people, cross-referencing tax returns and Social Security files, just to figure out who gets a check and for how much. Then they have to process this incredible volume of payments, a technical feat that strains their systems to the absolute breaking point. All the while, they're fighting a constant battle against fraud, because scammers see this as a golden opportunity to prey on people. And just as importantly, the government has to communicate clearly. Any confusion about who's eligible or when the money is coming creates a huge wave of public anxiety and just floods their phone lines, which slows everything down. It is a monumental, monumental challenge. So all of this experience, the successes, the failures, the struggles, it hasn't been wasted. Policymakers are now looking to the future and asking a really critical question: how can we do this better next time? The lessons we've learned from the last few crises are actively shaping the debate about how to make this powerful tool faster, smarter, and way more effective. And this brings us to a really fascinating potential evolution in how we think about stimulus. Traditionally, the whole process has been reactive, right? We wait for an economic disaster to hit, and then we scramble to pass a law, wasting precious weeks or even months. A future system could be automatic. Just imagine a world where, as soon as unemployment hits a certain percentage, payments are triggered automatically, with no political fight needed. Past stimulus has also been very broad, basically one-size-fits-all checks. Future relief could be way more targeted, using real-time data to send more money to the specific people and communities that are hurting the most. By combining these ideas with an even faster digital payment system, we could move from a process that takes weeks to one that delivers relief in just days. You know, it is so easy to get lost in all the Washington jargon, the committees, the votes, the budget scores, the political strategy, but it's so important to remember what this is all truly about. Behind every single legislative battle and every logistical headache are real families just trying to pay their rent, buy groceries, and keep the lights on during a crisis. The entire complex, messy, and frankly frustrating process we've just walked through, it's ultimately designed for one simple purpose: to provide a financial lifeline when people need it the most. And so we end with this really critical question for the future. We've seen just how powerful this tool can be, but we've also seen how messy and political the whole process is. Could a system of automatic, highly targeted payments be a smarter, more efficient way to fight the next recession? It would probably mean less political infighting and much faster help. But it would also mean handing over some control to economic data and algorithms. It's a fascinating debate, and honestly, the answer is going to shape how we respond to economic crises for decades to come. You ever wonder what it would actually take for another stimulus check to be sent out? Well, the answer might surprise you. It's not really about politics. It's all about economic data. So today, let's break down the dominoes that have to fall for that to happen. All right, let's just dive right into the biggest question of all. It seems kind of backward, right? But the answer is, yeah. A weaker economy has always been the single biggest trigger for widespread government stimulus. Let's get into why that is. Okay, first things first. We have to understand why this topic even keeps coming up. I mean, it's not just people being curious. For millions, this question is a direct reflection of their own wallets right now. And this quote, this really gets to the heart of it, doesn't it? This is the kind of thing you see in comment sections everywhere. When people are really struggling just to cover the basics, that whole conversation about financial relief, well, it gets really loud and it gets really constant. This is probably the most crucial thing to get. Yeah, stimulus checks are passed by politicians, but they're not really a political tool. A better way to think of them is like an economic emergency brake. You only pull that lever when the whole system is slowing down fast and needs a serious jolt to get going again. So that brings us to the trigger itself. What does a weak economy actually look like on paper, in terms of the data? And how do those numbers signal to lawmakers that, hey, maybe it's time to step in? This chart lays it out perfectly. It's like two sides of the same coin. On the left, you've got all the signs of a healthy, humming economy. But on the right, those are the alarm bells. When economists see a big nationwide shift from the left column to the right column, especially that jump in unemployment and a drop in spending, that's the signal. That's when you know the economy's in trouble, and the talk about intervention really starts. This whole cycle of the economy tanking and then lawmakers scrambling to do something, it led a few of them to float a pretty radical idea. What if the help just happened automatically? The idea was called automatic stabilizers, and you can just think of it like a simple if-then command for the economy. If unemployment hits a certain number, then relief payments are automatically sent out. The whole goal was to get money into people's hands way faster by cutting out the slow, messy legislative part. Now, the downside is less oversight, but the focus was on speed. Now, this proposed system gives us a really clear window into how policymakers think about this stuff. And even though this plan never became law, the logic here is absolutely key. It ties stimulus directly to one specific number, the unemployment rate. The plan was super simple. If unemployment hits, say, 6%, boom, a payment goes out. If it gets even worse, boom, another one follows. It just shows you how central that single data point is to the whole discussion. Okay, so let's shift gears and look at how this plays out in the real world right now. How does a slowing economy actually turn into money in your bank account? This is the typical chain reaction. And man, it usually happens fast. It all starts with that rapid economic contraction. And in response, lawmakers don't just act, they act big. They scramble to pass these enormous spending bills. Once a bill gets passed, a small slice of that massive pie is carved out and sent directly to us, the consumers. And it's all for one reason: to get people spending again and restart that economic engine. And it's so important to remember this. The checks themselves are almost never a standalone thing. They're usually just one piece of these gigantic, multi-billion, sometimes trillion-dollar packages with these big, sweeping names. The direct payments, they're kind of like the little bone thrown to regular folks inside these much, much larger spending bills. I love this old stock market saying because it perfectly captures why lawmakers have to move so fast. An economy usually grows pretty slowly, methodically, like walking up a flight of stairs. But when it falls fast, like an elevator with the cables cut. It's that sudden, sharp drop that creates the urgency, the political pressure to pass something, anything, quickly. So, here's another way to look at it, and it's a bit more controversial. Some economists actually see recessions as a totally normal, maybe even necessary, part of the business cycle. They call it a big old reset, a chance to clear out the old, inefficient stuff and make way for new growth. From this point of view, stimulus checks aren't really about stopping the reset, but more about cushioning the fall for everybody during that painful, but maybe inevitable transition. Okay, so we've got all these moving parts, all this data, GDP, inflation, consumer sentiment. So if you want to know what the real chances are of another stimulus, it really just comes down to one number. There is one indicator that stands head and shoulders above the rest in predicting what the government will do next. It gives us the clearest, most immediate picture of what's happening to the economy's health right now.
And that number is, you guessed it, the unemployment rate. This is the 30,000-foot view. It tells you, in really broad strokes, whether the country is growing or shrinking.
So why does this one number matter so much? Well, because a rising unemployment rate kicks off a really nasty, vicious cycle. Businesses start cutting jobs because their revenue is shrinking. But that means people have less money to spend, which, you guessed it, shrinks business revenue even more. It's a downward spiral, and lawmakers try to use stimulus to break that cycle. That's why a consistently rising unemployment rate is, without a doubt, the most important catalyst to watch. And all of this leaves us with a pretty provocative final thought. If a weak economy is what triggers financial help, does that mean we actually have to go through a painful economic reset for widespread relief to even become possible? It's a really complicated question about the tangled relationship between collective hardship and government help.
Today, we're not going to be talking about politics. We're not going to get bogged down in economic theory or fiscal policy. No, this explainer is all about the human story. We're going to explore what happens on the inside a person, inside a family, when a little bit of help shows up at exactly the right moment. This is all about the emotional impact of stimulus.
You know, this quote it gets right to the heart of everything. For millions of people, a direct payment isn't some abstract idea they hear about on the news. It's real. It's tangible. It's that feeling of a weight just lifting off your chest. It's the sound of an exhale you didn't even realize you were holding in. It's permission to stop panicking, even if it's just for a little while. And that's really the core of what we're looking at today, how money like this translates directly into peace of mind.
So before we can really understand that feeling of relief, we have to talk about the burden it replaces. And that burden, it's the constant crushing weight of financial worry. It's this silent stress that just follows you everywhere, and it affects every single part of your life in ways that, frankly, people who haven't been there can't fully understand.
I want you to just pause and really think about this for a second. What does it actually physically and mentally feel like? Because it's not just about the numbers in your bank account, right? It's this deeply personal, visceral experience that takes a massive toll.
It's a physical thing, that knot that ties up your stomach, or lying wide awake at 3 a.m. with your mind just racing, going over the same problems again and again. It puts a huge strain on our relationships, sparking arguments with the people we love, and that quiet heartbreak of having to tell your kids no. And this isn't just in your head. Study after study directly links this constant state of worry to depression, to anxiety, and even to high blood pressure. It just wears you down, body and soul.
And then something shifts. A little notification pops up on your phone. A deposit hits your account. And in that one single moment, that whole storm of worry just breaks. And this incredible feeling of relief washes over you. So let's look at what that moment really meant for actual people.
So, let's hear it straight from the people whose lives were changed. Their stories, well, they're the most powerful way to illustrate this impact.
Just try to put yourself in Sarah's shoes for a minute. For months, she was living with the terrifying possibility of eviction hanging over her family's head. That's not just a financial problem, that's a threat to her kids' fundamental safety and stability. So that money, it didn't just clear her debt with the landlord, it cleared the fear from her mind. It gave her the ability to sleep through the night again, knowing her kids had a safe place to call home. You can't put a price tag on that.
Mike's story here shows us something absolutely crucial. Agency, the ability to act. He was completely trapped. He wanted to work, he was out there looking, but a simple, practical problem, a broken down car, was standing in his way. So the stimulus wasn't a handout for him, it was a tool. It was the key that unlocked his ability to go out and solve his own problem. It empowered him to keep fighting for his future, and it restored not just his transportation, but his sense of control over his own life.
And here, with Maria, we see maybe the most direct link of all. For so many seniors on a fixed income, rising costs create these impossible choices. I mean, do you buy your groceries for the week or do you buy your heart medication? The stimulus check took that impossible choice off the table. This wasn't about luxury. For her, it was about life and death. It was a direct investment in her physical health, allowing her to afford the basic care she needed to live.
Now, these individual stories are incredibly powerful, right? But the impact doesn't just stop with one bill getting paid. That initial moment of relief, it actually sets off a chain reaction, a positive ripple effect that starts to touch every other part of a person's life.
It's this incredible cascade of relief.
So first, the immediate threat is gone. The rent is paid, the panic subsides. That creates step 2, breathing room. Your brain can finally shift out of that constant fight or flight crisis mode. And from there, you can actually move to step 3. You start planning for the future instead of just trying to survive today. And all of this leads to this profound confidence boost, that feeling of being back in control, of feeling more like yourself again. It's a total pivot from fear to empowerment.
Okay, so the stories and the feelings, that's the real heart of this. But it's also super important to ground all of this in some hard data. Because the numbers, they don't just quantify the economic impact. They actually help quantify the very emotional relief that we've been talking about.
So let's just use the 2021 stimulus as an example. For a family of 4, the total payment could be around $5,600. I mean, just look at that number. That is not a small amount of money. For a family that's living paycheck to paycheck, a sum like this is absolutely monumental. It is a game changer. But what does that actually mean in real-world terms?
This right here, this illustrates the massive scale of that impact. For so many families, that number doesn't just mean a small luxury, it's completely transformative. We're talking about half a year of rent, a full year of car payments, or 6 to 8 months of groceries. That's the power to wipe out crippling utility debt in a single moment, providing a genuine foundation to get stable again.
And the data connects right back to the emotions. I mean, these numbers show a staggering improvement in well-being. Look at this. 78% of people reported feeling less anxiety. 72% got a better night's sleep. And this one is huge. 81% said it reduced tension in their relationships. That's more than 4 out of 5 families arguing less about money, being able to connect on a human level again. This is powerful, powerful proof that financial stability is a cornerstone of our emotional and relational health.
So as we've seen through all the stories and all the data, this goes so much deeper than just economics. We've paid the bills, we've calmed the anxiety, but if we boil all of this down to its purest, simplest form, what is the true, fundamental power of this kind of assistance?
Let's just ask that question directly. After everything we've looked at, the relief, the ripple effect, the restored peace of mind, what is the single most important thing that a stimulus check really provides?
It's this. One word. Hope. In a world that can feel so overwhelming and isolating sometimes, hope is the fuel that keeps us all going. And that, more than anything else, is what this represents.
But what kind of hope are we talking about? Well, it's the hope that your current struggle isn't permanent. It's the belief in a better future, that there's a light at the end of the tunnel. And maybe, most importantly, it's the hope that comes from feeling seen. It's a signal from the world that someone recognizes you're struggling, that your hardship matters, and that you haven't been completely left behind or forgotten.
And that brings us to this final, crucial thought. If you're going through this, if you know what that weight of worry feels like, I just want you to remember this. You are not alone. Millions of people understand what you're feeling. Your worth is not defined by your bank balance. And that desire for dignity, for security, for a little peace of mind, that is a universal human need. This entire explainer has really just been about one thing, showing that a little help isn't just about the money. It's about validating our shared humanity. And that is a powerful message of hope for all of us.
Today, we're talking stimulus checks, but probably not in the way you're used to thinking about them. We usually see them as, a little bit of help, some financial relief. But what if that's just scratching the surface? Seriously, we're about to dive into what this money really is, and I promise you've never thought about it like this before. All right, so let's just start with a simple question to kind of shift our perspective. For just a second, try to forget everything you know or assume about this money, and just ask yourself, what if this thing, this direct deposit hitting your account, what if it wasn't just a check? What if it was something else entirely? Because, well, it is something else. It's a tool. It's an instrument that gives you real economic influence. And in this explainer, I'm going to show you exactly how that's not just some cool-sounding phrase. Nope, it's a real, measurable, economic fact. You're about to find out just how much power you're actually holding. Okay, let's get right into it. The very first superpower we need to talk about, it's a concept economists have known about for ages, but honestly, most of us have never heard of it. It's called the stimulus multiplier. And this is the secret sauce. It's how your check becomes way, way more than just the number printed on it. So yeah, this is the big idea right here, the multiplier effect. It's like this economic magic trick that happens the moment you spend your money. I mean, think about it, right? You go spend $1 at your local coffee shop. That dollar doesn't just disappear. The shop owner uses it to pay the barista. Then the barista uses it to buy groceries. The grocery store uses it to pay their stocker. And it just keeps going and going and going. Your $1 is out there, working, moving, creating value long after you've spent it.
And what's really wild is that economists can actually calculate this ripple effect. They use this surprisingly simple idea that has a super fancy name, the marginal propensity to consume, or MPC. Now, don't let that name scare you off. It's really just a simple question. For every new dollar you get, how much of it are you going to spend right away, and how much are you going to save?
So when it comes to stimulus checks, the average MPC is around 0.35. What does that mean? It means for every dollar that comes in, people spend about 35 cents of it almost immediately. The rest might go to savings or paying down debt, and that's important too. But that 35 cents, that's the spark. That's what gets the whole economic fire going.
Okay, so we've got the basic idea, and we've got the key number. Now let's put them together and see how this creates something, well, something huge. This is where it gets really, really cool.
So let's take a real number, like a $1,400 stimulus check. Picture that as the very first domino you're about to tip over.
Okay, so when you run the numbers, and the formula is basically built around that 35-cent spending habit we talked about, you get a multiplier of about 1.54. So you take your $1,400, you multiply it by 1.54, and what do you get? $2,156. Just let that sink in for a second. Your check's real impact on the economy isn't $1,400, it's over $2,000. You didn't just get help, you injected over $2,000 of economic energy into your community.
And that brings us to your next superpower, speed. Because it turns out it's not just that you spend the money, it's how fast you spend it. That's what makes stimulus such an incredible kickstarter for the economy. So let's look at why your spending is the catalyst here.
Yeah, economists have a term for this too. They call it spending velocity. And the best way to think about it is like a pond versus a river. Money just sitting in a savings account, that's a stagnant pond. It's not really doing much. But money that's being spent quickly, that's a powerful river. It's moving, it's circulating, it's creating energy everywhere it flows. And stimulus money, especially when it lands in the hands of people who really need it, that's one of the fastest flowing rivers there is.
And this chart just lays it out perfectly. I mean, look at this. Data from the pandemic stimulus checks showed a super clear pattern. In just 10 days, folks in low-income households had spent almost half their check, 44.5%, on things they needed right away. Middle-income families? About a quarter. High-income households? Barely 10%. They just didn't need it for immediate stuff. And that's why targeting stimulus matters so much. You put the money in the hands of the people who will get it flowing the fastest. Let's trace the journey of, say, $100. You decide to take the family out to a local restaurant. Okay, step one. The owner takes that $100 and uses it to pay a server and buy some fresh produce from a local farmer. That's step two. Now, that server takes her pay and gets a haircut down the street, and the farmer buys some new tools at the local hardware store. Step three. See what's happening? All these other local businesses are getting a piece of the action. Your one decision to eat out created a whole wave of opportunity for tons of other people in your town.
So here's the most important part. None of this is random. You are the one calling the shots. That means you can be strategic. You can choose to make your impact even bigger. This isn't just about spending money. It's about spending it with a purpose. Let's open up the playbook.
All right, play number one. Check this out. Studies show that when you spend $1 at a big national chain store, about $1.20 of economic activity stays local. Okay, that's not bad. But get this, when you spend that exact same dollar at a locally owned shop, it creates about $1.80 in local activity. That is a 50% bigger impact. Why the difference? It's simple. Local owners live where you live. They use local banks, hire local people. They're part of the same ecosystem. So your choice of where to grab a coffee literally changes the financial outcome for your neighborhood. But what about bills? What if you have to pay down debt? A lot of people think that's like an economic black hole, that the money just disappears. But that's not true at all. It's actually a huge power move. Think about it. When you pay down a high-interest credit card, you are giving your future self a raise. Let's say you knock out a $1,000 debt that has 20% interest. Boom, you just saved yourself $200 a year. That's $200 that is now free to be spent year after year. It becomes part of your regular cash flow, feeding right back into that local economy. It's a multiplier that pays off for a long, long time. And you know, for those in a position to do so, there's an even more powerful long-term move, investing. And I'm not talking about the stock market. I'm talking about investing in you. Using some of that money for a new certification, that could boost your earnings for the rest of your life. Using it to start that side hustle you've been dreaming about, that creates a whole new income stream. Heck, even putting it into new energy-efficient windows for your house, that lowers your bills forever. These are the kinds of choices that build real, lasting economic power.
Okay, let's talk about the final superpower. This is the one that most people completely miss, and it goes way beyond just your own bank account. This one has the power to lift up your whole community.
This is so fascinating. We never really talk about this, but the simple feeling of relief that comes with a stimulus check, that's not just a feeling. It has actual, measurable economic value. Get this, studies show that severe financial stress can tank someone's productivity at work by as much as 20%. It also leads to higher healthcare costs for everybody, so when you reduce that stress, even for a little while, people can focus better, they're more productive, they make smarter decisions. This psychological multiplier helps create a healthier, more effective workforce, and that's a huge hidden win for the whole economy. So how do you actually use all this? You make a plan. You can literally time your moves to get the biggest bang for your buck. So phase 1, the first month, focus on that high-speed spending. Cover your immediate needs, ideally at local spots, and attack that nasty high-interest debt. Phase 2, the next couple of months, now you get strategic. You make a conscious effort to support local shops, and just as important, you tell other people about this stuff. The long game, you take that extra cash flow you created by paying off debt, and you use it for more local spending or those smart personal investments. It's a step-by-step plan to becoming an economic power player.
And that really brings us to the single most important takeaway here. Once you understand all this, the multiplier effect, spending velocity, the power of buying local, everything changes. You're not just some passive person getting a handout. No, you are an active, crucial part of a really sophisticated economic engine. The entire system relies on your choices, where you spend your money, when you spend it, what you buy, to create those positive ripples that benefit everyone. Your role is not passive, it is active. And that, right there, is your superpower.
You've probably wondered how government stimulus programs actually work, right? Well, today, we're pulling back the curtain and breaking down the entire system. We're giving you the insights you need to really understand it, and even navigate it. Think of this less as an explanation, and more as your personal playbook. Okay, so that sounds a little dramatic, I know, but it gets to the very heart of what we're talking about today. This isn't about some wild conspiracy theory. It's about understanding the predictable mechanics behind a really complex system, seeing the patterns, the timing, and the formulas that, honestly, most people never even notice.
And that right there, that's the goal. By the time we're done here, you're going to understand the why and the when behind stimulus checks. It's all about shifting you from just being a passive recipient to someone who is prepared, informed, and ready. So let's dive in. First things first, we've got to look backwards to see what's ahead. It turns out these big stimulus programs aren't just random acts of kindness from the government. Nope. Our analysis shows this remarkably predictable pattern that has played out during almost every major economic crisis in recent history. Understanding this cycle is your first real advantage.
This right here maps out the entire life cycle. It all kicks off with an economic trigger, a recession, a pandemic, something big. Then you get this weird denial phase, where officials might try to downplay it, but that always shifts to recognition, and that's followed by a frantic legislative sprint to pass a bill. Only then do we get to the distribution and, hopefully, the recovery. If you can figure out which phase we're in, you can start to anticipate what's coming months before anyone else.
And this is fascinating because it shows us that stimulus isn't just pure economics. It's got a ton to do with political timing. The data's pretty clear. When unemployment climbs over 6%, the chances of action just skyrocket. Same thing happens in an election year. It's a powerful tool on the campaign trail. So the real takeaway here, you should be watching the monthly job reports and the political calendar just as closely as the economists do. Those are the real tells.
Okay, so let's move on. Let's talk about the actual dollar amounts you hear on the news. $1,200, $600, $1,400. You might think they're just pulled out of a hat, right? Well, they're not. There's a real science behind them, a calculated effort to find that perfect economic sweet spot. Let's decode those magic numbers. So why does a number like $1,400 keep popping up like it did back in 2021? Well, it all comes down to tons of economic research that's identified this amount as basically the sweet spot. It's just enough money to actually change people's spending habits and give the economy a real boost, but it's designed to be just under the point where it might trigger massive runaway inflation. It's the maximum bang for the buck.
Now, to really get why $1,400 works, you need to know about this one concept. It sounds fancy, marginal propensity to consume, or MPC, but I promise the idea is super simple. All it means is this: if I give you an extra dollar, how much of it will you immediately go out and spend? The answer to that question is probably the single most important factor for figuring out how effective a stimulus check is actually going to be.
And this chart breaks down what happens to that money. The research shows that people with very little in savings will spend about 45 cents of every new dollar, like right away. For the average person, it's closer to 35 cents. The rest, it usually gets saved or used to pay off some debt. This data is exactly why stimulus is often targeted. The government knows that getting money to the people who will spend it the fastest is the key to kickstarting the economy.
Now let's talk about timing. What a lot of people don't realize is that a stimulus payment has a shelf life. It's kind of like a shot of adrenaline for the economy. For the first 3 months, you get the biggest positive impact. But after that, the benefits start to fade and the worries about inflation start to creep in. This 6-month window is absolutely critical. It explains why, sometimes, we see multiple rounds of stimulus spaced about half a year apart. They're trying to keep hitting that sweet spot before the downsides take over.
Okay, so we've covered the when and the how much. Now let's get to the part I'm sure you really care about. How do you get it? See, the IRS has a very clear, very methodical distribution hierarchy. And knowing where you are in this pecking order is the absolute key to getting your money as fast as humanly possible.
The order is simple and it's absolute. At the very top of the list, the VIPs of stimulus are people who have direct deposit information on file with the IRS. They can see that money in just a matter of days. Next up are federal beneficiaries, like folks on Social Security. And way at the back of the line, waiting weeks longer, are the people who get paper checks or debit cards. The takeaway here couldn't be clearer. Direct deposit is king.
Now, your eligibility isn't just a simple yes or no. It's based on your adjusted gross income, your AGI, from your last tax return. And as you can see, there are some pretty clear cliffs. If you're a single filer, you get the full amount up to $75,000. But for every dollar you earn over that, the payment starts to shrink until it just disappears. Knowing these numbers lets you strategize. For someone who's just a little bit over a threshold, a simple move like bumping up a retirement contribution could lower their AGI and suddenly make them eligible for the whole thing. So, we've unpacked the patterns, we've decoded the numbers, and we've looked at the distribution system. Now let's get to the final and I think most important part, turning all of this knowledge into a real personal strategy that you can actually use to maximize your benefit and get ready for whatever's next. To build that strategy, let's start with just a single dollar. When the government sends you $1 of stimulus, its journey is just getting started. It actually sets off this incredible chain reaction throughout the economy, something economists call the multiplier effect.
And thanks to that multiplier effect, your one little stimulus dollar actually creates about $1.54 in total economic activity. How? Well, you spend it at a local restaurant. The owner then uses that dollar to pay their supplier. The supplier then pays their employee. See? That single dollar gets spent over and over again. And the source material points out that you can make this even more powerful by consciously spending that money at local businesses, keeping it flowing right there in your own community.
But, and this is a big but, it's so important to understand the trade-off here. Stimulus gives that immediate, often necessary relief, but it can also lead to inflation down the road, which we all saw happen after 2021. So the key takeaway for your personal strategy is that when you get a payment, it's probably pretty smart to also prepare for the possibility of higher prices on things like gas and groceries in the months that follow. So what can you do? Like right now? Here it is, a simple 3-step action plan. First, head over to irs.gov and just confirm they have your correct info. Second, if your bank account has changed or you've moved, update it. This is the single biggest thing that affects how quickly you get paid. And third, and this is a big one a lot of people miss, even if you have zero income to report and you don't owe any taxes, file a simple return. It gets you in the system, it puts you on the list, it makes sure you don't get overlooked. So, let's just bring it all home. This is your new advantage. You're no longer just sitting around waiting for the news to tell you what's happening. You can now anticipate when a stimulus might be coming just by watching those key triggers. You know the exact steps to take to get it faster than most people. You understand the logic behind how much you might get, and you know how to use it effectively to help yourself and your community. You have the whole picture now.
So there you have it. We've just handed you the insider's playbook. You now have a deep understanding of the patterns, the numbers, the systems, and the strategies behind economic stimulus. And that knowledge, that's power. The only question left is,
Now that you can see what's coming, how are you going to use it?
Let's talk about the one thing that is on just about everybody's mind: stimulus checks. Is more help actually on the way? We've been digging through all the source material to get you some real answers about whether another check is coming, how much it could be, and maybe most importantly, what you can do about it right now. So let's just cut right to the chase. This is the big question, isn't it? Are we really getting more stimulus checks? Okay, here's how we're going to break this all down for you. First, we'll look at how likely more stimulus is. Then, the fun part, what a potential check could actually look like. We'll also get into why this whole thing is so complicated, inflation and all that. And we'll wrap up with what you can actually do to get prepared.
First step is more stimulus coming. Let's get the honest, no-fluff answer.
Look, the most honest answer is nobody knows for sure because nothing's been signed into law. But, and this is a big but, that definitely doesn't mean it's a no. There are absolutely reasons to be hopeful, and more importantly, there are some really key signs you can watch for that could signal help is on the way. So what exactly should we be looking for? Well, the sources point to 4 main signals. If you start seeing headlines about widespread layoffs, rising unemployment, or the stock market taking a big dip, those are all huge economic red flags. And the 4th one, it's political. You gotta listen to the language. When politicians start talking less about the deficit and more about helping people, that's usually when the talk starts turning into action. And this really gets to the heart of the issue, right? On one hand, you've got reasons for hope. It's an election year, and history shows us that politicians are way more likely to act when the economy looks weak. But then there's the caution side, the reality check. Right now, these are just proposals. No check has actually been approved. And if the economy bounces back on its own, all that pressure to send out more money could just evaporate.
Okay, now for the part I know everyone is really waiting for. Let's talk about the money. If a check does come, how much could we be talking about, and who would actually get it?
History actually gives us some really powerful clues here. If you look at the pattern, the payments have been growing over time. Back in 2008, it was around $600. By 2021, we were at $1,400 per person. So a pretty clear trend has been set, and that trend is up. So where does that trend lead? Well, based on the source material, a lot of experts think the next number could land somewhere between that last $1,400 mark and $2,000 per person. I mean, stop and think about that for a second. For a family of 4, that could be an $8,000 check. That is absolutely life-changing money. And here's the really good news. These payments are almost always designed to help a broad range of people. We're talking about folks who work and pay taxes, retirees on Social Security, people who are unemployed, and of course, families with kids. You don't have to be living in poverty to qualify. Most middle-class households have been included in the past. The whole point is to help regular, everyday people.
So this all leads to the big question. If people need help and there's a history of giving it, what's the holdup? Well, it really boils down to 2 huge complications: the fear of inflation and just a massive flood of misinformation out there.
Okay, first, let's just make sure we're all on the same page with inflation. All it really means is that your dollar doesn't go as far as it used to. The prices for everything, gas, groceries, you name it, they go up, and your money just buys less. This is the #1 reason opponents of more stimulus bring up. But was stimulus really the main villain? Well, the source material shows it's just one piece of a much bigger puzzle. You had massive supply chain problems, soaring energy costs, and a lot of companies just hiking up their prices. So stimulus was a factor, for sure, but it wasn't the whole story. And this is the debate policymakers are having. How do you help people who are hurting without making prices go up even more? And then there's the other big problem: misinformation. I mean, come on, you've seen posts like this all over your social media feed, right? They're designed to prey on your hope, on your desperation. And let's be real, they are almost always fake. And a lot of times they're straight up dangerous scams. So how do you protect yourself from this stuff? It's pretty simple. Be skeptical. Real official announcements will come from official places, like irs.gov. It'll be on every major news network. If some random post promises you $5,000 a month, it's probably not real. And whatever you do, never, ever click on suspicious links. All this waiting and wondering, it can make you feel pretty powerless, but you're not. So let's shift gears. Let's talk about what you can actually do right now to put yourself in the best possible position. Here is a simple 4-step action plan. The first 2 are all about making it easy for the government to pay you. Go to the IRS website and make sure your address and bank info are up to date. And file your taxes, even if you have zero income and don't owe anything. Third, stay informed, but stick to reliable news sources. And finally, use your voice. Let your elected representatives know that you need help. It really does make a difference. Oh, and a super important side note here. If you think you might have missed out on that big payment from 2021, you might still be able to get it. It's called the Recovery Rebate Credit, and you claim it by filing a 2021 tax return. But you have got to act fast because that window to claim it is closing. Now, if a payment does get approved, having a plan for that money is everything. The sources suggest this priority list. Start with survival stuff, rent, food, keeping the lights on. Then immediately attack any high-interest debt, credit cards, payday loans, the stuff that's costing you money every single month. After that, build up some security, like a small emergency fund. Look, this isn't about being told what to do. It's just a smart strategy to turn that money into real, lasting stability. I really want to end with this thought because it's just so important to remember. If you're feeling that financial pressure, if you're worried about how you're going to make it to the end of the month, please know you are not alone in this. Millions and millions of your neighbors are going through the exact same thing, just hoping for a little bit of help. And that brings us to our last question, the one we want to leave you with. We've talked about the signs, the politics, the numbers, the scams, and how to prepare. So now it gets personal. If that money comes through, what's your plan? Seriously, having an answer to that question is maybe the most powerful thing you can do. Today, we're going to dive into a fascinating new study that completely rethinks those stimulus checks a lot of us received a few years back. It asks a really simple but powerful question. Was there a much smarter way to handle that economic rescue? The answer? Well, it might just change how we think about this stuff forever. Let's get into it. Yeah, you remember it, right? Seeing that direct deposit hit your bank account during what was a really, really uncertain time. For a lot of folks, it was an absolute lifeline. For others, well, maybe it just went straight into savings. This new research suggests that by being a lot more deliberate about who gets the money, we could create a system that's not just more powerful, but a whole lot more efficient too. So to really understand this new proposal, we first have to rewind and look at the old one. Economists have been digging through mountains of data from those 3 big stimulus rounds, and they found some pretty big problems with that money for everyone approach. Let's unpack what they learned. Okay, so the first issue was just the sheer scale of it all. Checks went out to 85% of the entire US population. Think about that. The goal was to get money into the economy fast, no questions asked, but the study argues this was like using a fire hose to water a houseplant. It was just way, way too broad. And, of course, that super broad approach came with a truly colossal price tag. We're talking about roughly $850 billion with a B. That's an incredible amount of money. And when you're spending that kind of cash, you really, really want every single dollar to count. According to this research, a lot of those dollars simply didn't. And here's maybe the biggest unintended consequence of them all. All that cash flooding the system at once contributed about 3 percentage points to the inflation that we've all been feeling. You can almost hear the whoops moment in the research. Sending so much money to so many people, a lot of whom didn't need to spend it right away, just helped pour fuel on the fire of rising prices. So the takeaway is pretty clear. It was incredibly expensive, inefficient, and it came with that inflationary sting in the tail. Okay, so if blanketing the entire country with cash isn't the best way to go, what is? Well, the answer lies in a really simple but incredibly powerful economic idea. It all comes down to understanding the fundamental difference between 2 types of people, the spender and the saver. Now, the fancy official term for this is the marginal propensity to consume, or MPC. I know, sounds a little complicated, but it's really not. All it means is this. If I give you an extra $1, what are you most likely to do with it? Are you going to go out and spend it pretty much immediately? Or are you going to stick it in the bank or maybe pay down some debt? That simple question is the absolute key to unlocking a smarter stimulus. So let's break this down. On one side, you have people with a high MPC. These are typically your low-income folks, people on a fixed income. When they get some extra cash, it immediately gets spent on necessities. We're talking rent, groceries, gas for the car. It gets put right back into the economy. On the other side, you have people with a low MPC. These are usually higher income individuals. When they get an extra check, they're far more likely to save it, invest it, maybe pay off a credit card bill. That money doesn't really move. For a stimulus to actually work, you need spenders, not savers. It's that simple. So, how do you take this idea of MPC and turn it into an actual concrete plan? Well, this is where the study gets really exciting. It suggests a completely different strategy. Instead of small checks for everyone, it proposes larger, ongoing checks for a very, very specific group of people. And here it is. The proposal is for ongoing $2,000 monthly checks. But the most important word on this slide is only. These payments would be hyper-focused, going exclusively to those low-income, high-MPC individuals, the people who are guaranteed to put that money right back into circulation. It's like switching from a shotgun to a laser beam.
And the data on this is just crystal clear. The study found that when a high MPC person gets that $2,000, their spending is incredibly fast and predictable. About $1,600, that's 80%, is spent within the first 10 days. The rest of it is gone within a month. This is exactly what you want for economic stimulus. The money doesn't just sit there, it moves, it creates a ripple effect, paying for groceries, car repairs, new shoes for the kids, you name it. You know, it all just comes back to the original goal. The source material puts it perfectly. We're not looking for savers, we're looking for spenders. The entire point is to get money moving, to stimulate the economy. And to do that, you have to give it to the people who are actually going to spend it. It's right there in the name.
So when you put it all together, you take the lessons from the past and you apply this logic of MPC, you end up with a proposal that the study argues is just better from every angle. It's smarter, it's cheaper, and it's way more effective. Let's just recap the huge advantages of this kind of targeted strategy. The advantages are pretty amazing when you lay them out. First, you get a much bigger bang for your buck, a greater stimulative effect because the money is actually spent, not hoarded. Because of that incredible efficiency, the total cost would be significantly less than that $850 billion program from before. But just as important, it sends meaningful, ongoing support directly to the people who are struggling the most, all while avoiding the waste of sending checks to people who just save it. It really is a win from every single angle. And that really leaves us with the big final question, doesn't it? We've seen the flaws of the old model and the compelling logic of this new one. This idea of moving away from these broad, universal payments toward highly focused, targeted financial support, it could be a major turning point in how governments respond to economic crises. It really feels like a blueprint for a future where help isn't just more generous for those who need it most, but a whole lot smarter for the economy as a whole. You know, we hear all these huge economic headlines, but what do they actually mean for us, for our families? Today, we're digging into exactly that. What happens when massive government stimulus policies land right in your bank account? We're going to break down how it all translates into real-world impact and go way beyond the numbers you see on the news. So, here's how we're going to break it all down for you. We'll start with those mind-boggling big numbers and funnel it down to a single household budget. Then we'll get into the human impact, see exactly where the money went, talk about making that impact stick, and wrap up with what it all means for policy that's really about people. All right, let's dive right in. The main idea here is to connect the dots, between this massive, abstract government policy and the very real-world situation of paying your bills every month. So you turn on the news, right? And you hear these numbers, hundreds of billions, sometimes trillions of dollars. I mean, they're so huge they don't even feel real. It's a scale that feels totally disconnected from our day-to-day lives, almost like something out of a textbook, instead of a force that's actually shaping our communities. So, how do we bring these astronomical figures down to earth, to the conversations happening around the kitchen table? The real question is, how does $1 trillion policy turn into something that actually helps you cover rent, buy your groceries, or finally get the car fixed? That's where this story gets really personal and, frankly, really interesting. Okay, let's put a real number on this. During one of the stimulus rounds, a typical family of 4 could have gotten a single payment of $5,600. Now, for some people, that's a nice little cushion. But for millions and millions of families, a sum like this isn't just helpful. It was an absolute game changer that could completely reshape their finances for months to come. And look at what that money really means. Based on national averages, that $5,600 isn't just a number. It's almost 5 months of rent. That's housing security. It's 7 months of food on the table. It's over a year of keeping the lights on. All of a sudden, that one-time payment represents real, tangible stability, a moment to finally breathe. Okay, so having that financial breathing room is huge. But the impact, well, it goes way deeper than just balancing a checkbook. It has these profound personal effects on our actual well-being. And, the data is super clear on this. The relief isn't felt equally by everyone.
For the most financially vulnerable groups, it was an absolute lifeline. Think about low-income households living paycheck to paycheck. That money got spent almost immediately on things they desperately needed. For seniors on a fixed income, it might have meant not having to choose between medication and food. For someone who'd lost their job, it was a bridge to finding new work. And for families with kids, well, it helped cover all those endless extra costs.
And this, right here, gets to the absolute heart of it. It's not just about the money, it's about mental and emotional health. Nearly 8 out of every 10 people said they felt less anxiety about paying their bills. That is a massive psychological shift. It's like a heavy weight just being lifted off their shoulders.
And that feeling of relief, it creates this incredible ripple effect through a person's entire life. When you're not in constant crisis mode, you sleep better, your mental health improves. We all know financial stress can strain relationships, so easing that burden can actually make families stronger. And since that chronic stress takes a physical toll, this relief can even lead to better health. People are just freed up to think more clearly and make better decisions for the future. So we know who benefited and how it made them feel, but where did all that money actually go? What did people spend it on? Looking at the spending patterns gives us this crucial insight into what people really needed in that moment. Well, the answer is pretty clear. Overwhelmingly, the funds went straight to the absolute essentials. The biggest piece of the pie went to things like housing, food, and utilities. The next biggest, paying down debt, especially that high-interest credit card debt that can trap families for years. After that, we saw people catching up on things they'd put off, like fixing a broken fridge or getting essential car repairs. And finally, some of it went into savings, building a small buffer for the next emergency. And this is so important to understand. The spending doesn't just stop with the person who got the check. It creates what you could call a personal multiplier effect. When you use that money to pay your rent, you're helping your landlord pay their mortgage. When you buy groceries, you're supporting that local store and its employees. That spending helps stabilize the entire local economy from the ground up. Of course, it's also true that a dollar isn't a dollar everywhere in the country, right? The same amount of money can have a wildly different impact depending on where you live. In a super expensive city like New York or LA, a $1,400 check might not even cover a single month's rent. It helps for sure, but its power is limited. But in a rural town or a smaller city, that same amount could cover rent or utilities for several months, making it way more transformative for that family. All right, let's shift gears for a second and talk about something really crucial, the fact that these payments were temporary. A one-time cash infusion is incredibly powerful, but the real question for personal finance is how you turn it into something that lasts. We have to remember what these checks were designed to be. They were a temporary bridge, right? A way to get people through a really tough spot. They were never meant to be an ongoing, permanent solution. And understanding that is totally key to using the money in the smartest way possible. So for a lot of people, the goal was to use this one-time boost to build a stronger foundation for the future. And that usually looks like one of 3 things. First, building an emergency fund. Even a small one can stop the next unexpected expense from becoming a full-blown crisis. Second, attacking high-interest debt, which frees up your money every single month moving forward. And third, investing in yourself. Maybe a training course or a certification that can boost your earning power for the long haul. So, after looking at all of this, the numbers, the spending, the personal strategies, what's the big takeaway here? What does it all add up to? You know, at the end of the day, you have to peel back all the layers of economic theory and political debate. Because behind every single one of these statistics, there's a human story. It's the story of a parent who can finally buy their kid the right school supplies. It's a senior who doesn't have to choose between their medicine and their groceries. It's a family that gets to stay in their home. And that really leaves us with one big question as we look to the future. We've seen just how powerful this kind of direct help can be. So, when the next crisis hits, and there will always be a next one, how do we build on these lessons? How can we design policies that aren't just effective on a spreadsheet, but are truly, deeply, and personally transformative for the people who need that help the most? That's a conversation we need to be having.
So, is another stimulus check on the horizon for 2025? Man, it's a question that's just swimming in rumors and speculation online. Today, we're going to cut through all that noise and give you the real, fact-based answers you're looking for.
All right, this is the big one, isn't it? It's the question that's on pretty much everyone's mind, and it's probably why you're here. So let's not waste any time. Let's just get right to it.
Okay, let's be crystal clear about this right from the start. As of right now, no new federal stimulus payment has been approved. I know you might see stuff floating around on social media, but the bottom line is Congress has not passed any new laws to send out more direct payments.
So here's our game plan for this explainer. First, we'll start out the facts from the fiction. Then we're going to dive into the key economic numbers that lawmakers are watching. We'll also look at what it would actually take to trigger new payments. After that, we'll walk you through the whole process, from a bill to your bank account, and we'll wrap up with what you can do to be ready.
Okay, first things first, let's get a really clear picture of what's happening right now. It is so easy to get swept up in all the online chatter, so it's absolutely crucial to know the difference between what's official and what's just, well, noise. And this really is the key takeaway at the federal level. Congress hasn't passed a thing, but, and this is a really interesting twist, that isn't the whole story. You know, while the conversation in D.C. has pretty much stalled, the idea of direct payments is still very much alive in the states. I mean, we've seen places like New York, California, and Georgia all issue their own relief. So that tells you there's still a real appetite for this kind of support. It's just happening on a more local level for now.
So if nothing's happening, the big question is, why? Well, to answer that, we have to look at the economic data, the same numbers that lawmakers and economists are staring at every single day. These numbers are really the foundation for any decision, so let's get into them.
First, let's talk about jobs. Right now, the unemployment rate is sitting in the low 4% range. Now, historically speaking, that's considered pretty healthy. Sure, it's ticked up a little bit, but it is nowhere near the kind of distrust level that would normally have Washington sounding the alarm bells for emergency action.
And what about inflation? Remember when it felt like prices were just skyrocketing on everything? Well, things have cooled off a lot. Inflation is now down around 2.4%, which is way closer to the Federal Reserve's 2% target. This takes a lot of the urgency away because the economy isn't running red hot anymore.
And the overall economy? We look at something called the gross domestic product, or GDP for that, and it's projected to grow just over 2%. Now, the most important part of that sentence is the word grow. The economy is expanding, not shrinking. We are not in a recession, which is almost always the starting point for this kind of massive stimulus.
This chart right here really puts it all into perspective. See that bar on the left? That's us right now, with unemployment around 4.2%. Now look at the bar on the right. That represents the historical danger zone, that 6 to 7% level where Congress has traditionally felt like they have to step in and do something. You can see there's a pretty big gap between where we are today and a full-blown crisis.
Okay, so if the economy is chugging along, what could possibly change all this? What are the specific events or economic shifts that could suddenly put stimulus checks right back on the front burner in Washington?
You're going to want to keep an eye out for these 4 potential game changers. First, if unemployment starts climbing and crosses that 6% threshold we just talked about. Second, a huge drop in the stock market could totally wreck consumer confidence. Third, some kind of major geopolitical crisis or a massive natural disaster could send a shockwave through the economy. And finally, well, never ever underestimate election year politics. Stimulus checks tend to be pretty popular with voters.
You know, the whole debate is really complex, and there are good arguments on both sides. People who are for it will tell you that a lot of families are still really struggling, and that direct payments could stop a slowdown from becoming a recession. But on the other side, opponents will point to the stable economy and the gigantic national debt, and they'll argue that more stimulus would just pour gasoline on the fire of inflation.
So let's imagine one of those triggers actually happens. How does an idea for a check become actual money that you can spend? Let's pull back the curtain on that process. It's a long road with a lot of steps.
It all kicks off with the economic data. The numbers have to look bad enough for people to agree there's a problem. Then a member of Congress or the president proposes a bill. That bill has to fight its way through committees. If it survives, it goes to the full House and Senate for debates and votes. If, and that's a big if, it passes both, it finally goes to the president to be signed into law. Only then does the IRS get the green light for the final step, sending out the money.
And check this out. This timeline shows just how fast that last step can be. Once the political fight is over, the government has gotten incredibly good at this. The first big one, the CARES Act, took about 2 weeks. By the time the American Rescue Plan came around in 2021, money was hitting bank accounts within a week. The big takeaway here is that the system is built and ready to go fast, once a decision is actually made.
So, with everything so up in the air, the best thing you can do is focus on what you can actually control. Really, the most important thing is just to be prepared, whether a stimulus payment ever shows up or not.
Here are 4 simple, really practical steps you can take. First, go to the IRS website and make sure they have your current mailing address and direct deposit info. That is the #1 thing you can do to get paid quickly. Second, file your taxes every year, even if you don't owe anything. This keeps you in the system. Third, get your news from reliable sources and official government websites, not from some random post on social media. And finally, have a plan for what you do with the money, whether it's paying down debt or beefing up your savings.
Okay, we have covered a ton of ground here. The current situation, the economic data, what could change things, the whole process. So after all that, what is the single most important thing you should walk away with?
It's this. Any decision about future stimulus checks will be driven by cold, hard economic data, like unemployment and GDP, not by online rumors. So your best strategy isn't to just cross your fingers and hope for a check. It's to be prepared. Getting your financial house in order is always the smartest move, no matter what happens in Washington.
And that brings us to one last, really big idea to chew on. After the massive government response to the pandemic, have direct payments like these become a permanent new tool in the economic toolbox? Is this something we should just expect now, every time the economy stumbles? That right there is the bigger question that's going to shape how we manage the economy for years to come.
Today, we are going to tackle a huge question, one that I know is on a lot of people's minds, especially if you're on a fixed income. And that question is all about financial relief. Is more on the way? But to find the answer, we're not going to get bogged down in politics. Nope, we're going to follow the data, we're going to look at the history, and we're going to track the economic signals that tell the real story.
All right, let's just jump right in. Is 2025 the year we finally see another stimulus check? Maybe for $2,000, maybe even more? I mean, let's be real, people are struggling. It's been a tough few years, and a lot of folks are looking for any kind of break they can get. So what's really going on? Are we going to see another big round of payments hit our bank accounts next year?
You know, the funny thing is, the answer to that question has nothing to do with petitions or online chatter. Lawmakers don't just act because we ask them to. The real trigger, the thing that actually makes a stimulus payment happen, is 100% tied to the health of the U.S. economy. And once you grasp that connection, honestly, the whole picture gets a lot clearer.
So let's break this down. There's a fundamental principle at play here, a kind of simple rule that dictates when the government decides to step in with this kind of major financial help. And it's actually a pretty predictable mechanism. That is, if you know what you're looking for.
I want you to picture a seesaw at a playground. On one side, you've got the strength of the economy. On the other side, you have the likelihood of a stimulus check. Now, when the economy is strong, it's booming, unemployment is low, companies are hiring, that side of the seesaw is planted firmly on the ground. The chance of stimulus? Very, very low. But what happens when the economy gets weak? When it starts contracting, unemployment starts ticking up, and you hear whispers of a recession? Well, that side of the seesaw goes way up in the air, which brings the stimulus side crashing down, making it way more likely.
This brings us to a concept called inverse correlation. Now, I know that sounds a little jargony, but the idea is super simple. When one thing goes up, the other goes down. They're opposites. A stimulus payment isn't a reward for a good economy. It's a rescue tool for a weak one. The government uses it when they think the economy is about to fall into a recession and it needs a jolt to get people spending again. This is probably the single most important thing to understand in all of this.
And look, this isn't just some theory. It is a clear, undeniable pattern that we have seen repeat itself every single time our economy has faced a major crisis, for more than 2 decades now. History really gives us a crystal clear roadmap here.
Just think back over the last 3 major recessions. In 2001, the dot-com bubble burst. And what happened? Stimulus checks were issued. Fast forward to 2008, the housing market completely collapses, and it takes the entire economy down with it. The government's response? You guessed it, stimulus checks. And then, of course, in 2020, the pandemic shuts down the entire world, triggering a massive recession. And what did they do? Once again, stimulus checks. It's the same play every single time.
Let's look at the actual numbers. Back in 2001, after that tech bubble popped, the government sent out checks for $300. Now, at the time, that was seen as a pretty big deal to try and stabilize things.
Then we jumped to the massive financial crisis of 2008. The economic damage was just immense. So the government responded again, but this time the checks were for $600. Keep that number in your head. It doubled from the last recession.
And that brings us to 2020. The economy basically slammed on the brakes overnight. It was completely unprecedented. So lawmakers passed the CARES Act, and that very first stimulus check, it was for $1,200. Do you see it? That number doubled again from the 2008 amount.
And this is where it gets really fascinating. Because when you put these numbers side by side, it's not just random. A very clear and kind of curious trend emerges. It's a distinct pattern of escalation.
I mean, the math here is it's incredibly straightforward. From $300 in 2001, it doubled to $600 in 2008. Then from $600, it doubled again to $1,200 in 2020. Every single time a major recession hits, that initial relief payment has doubled. That can't be a coincidence, right?
So naturally, this makes you ask the question, if this historical trend were to continue, what would the math suggest is next? Well, if you double $1,200, you get $2,400. Now, let me be perfectly clear. This is not a prediction. It's not a promise. It's simply an observation based on a very clear historical pattern. But it is a pretty interesting thought, isn't it?
Okay, so this all brings us to the most important question of all. If a weak economy is the trigger, what are the specific red flags we should be watching for right now as we head into 2025? Think of this as your personal toolkit for seeing what's coming down the tracks.
All right, these are the headlines you need to pay attention to. First, rising unemployment claims. This is the big one. It's a direct signal that businesses are hurting and jobs are being lost. Second, keep an eye on the Federal Reserve. When the Fed starts cutting interest rates like they began to do in September of 2024, it's their way of saying, uh-oh, things are slowing down too much. They're trying to give the economy a shot of adrenaline. And finally, just listen to the language on the financial news. When you hear words like softening, slowing, or contracting over and over again, those aren't just buzzwords. That's the consensus that the seesaw is starting to tilt.
And you have to remember, while the economic slowdown can feel kind of gradual, the actual shift into a full-blown crisis and the government's response can happen in the blink of an eye. Seriously. Just think back to early 2020. In February, most of us were living our lives completely normally. By March, everything was shut down. And by early April, stimulus checks were already starting to hit people's accounts. It can go from 0 to 100 in just a matter of weeks. It happens that fast.
So, the real takeaway here is this. Your best forecast isn't going to come from listening to politicians' promises or signing online petitions. It's going to come from you paying attention to those key economic signs we just talked about. The economy tells the real story, long before any official announcement is ever made. The data, that's the real crystal ball.
So, as we wrap this all up, the picture becomes pretty clear, right? We have the seesaw rule. A weak economy triggers stimulus. We have the historical precedent. It has happened in every single major recession for the last 25 years. And we have that wild doubling effect in the amounts. History has basically drawn us a map, and it leaves us with one final provocative thought. The pattern seems to be set in stone. The only real question left isn't if it will repeat, but when.
You know, we've all been hearing the chatter about another stimulus check, but today we're going to dig into an argument that says maybe we're all asking the wrong question. What if the next round of aid wasn't for everybody, but was laser-focused on the people who truly needed the most?
I mean, you see it all the time, right? Is another $1,400 check coming? It's the question, and for a lot of people, the hope that just doesn't seem to go away.
But the analysis we're looking at today completely flips that on its head. It stops asking if we should send out more money and starts asking a much sharper question: who should actually be getting it? And you know, that one little change shifts the entire conversation from just a universal handout to a really precise tool for helping people.
So let's start with the big idea here. The financial struggle in this country, well, it's not a one-size-fits-all problem, is it? We're not all in the same boat. So why would we all need the exact same lifeline?
And the argument laid out here is super direct. It says, look, sending a check to almost everyone is just not the most efficient way to solve the problem. The real power could come from a targeted rescue mission for those who are really, truly struggling right now. This whole thing really sets up a clear choice between two very different philosophies. So how does this targeted idea actually stack up against those big, broad stimulus checks we've all seen before? Let's break it down.
Okay, so on one side, you've got the way we've done things before. Broad, universal checks that went out to something like 85% of the entire population. And yeah, that came with a really high price tag, but on the other side, you have this proposed approach. It's focused, it's targeted, it goes only to low and fixed income folks, which means the cost is much, much lower and way more concentrated. It's basically the difference between casting a giant net and using a scalpel.
So, if we're going to get targeted, who exactly are we talking about? Who is in this group? Well, the analysis points to a pretty specific slice of the population that's facing the toughest financial battles.
The starting point is a number that's, well, it's kind of hard to ignore. 40 million. Right now, there are 40 million people in this country living in poverty. That is a staggering figure all by itself.
But believe it or not, that 40 million is just the beginning. When you widen the lens just a little bit to include people who are very low income, the ones living just a hair above the poverty line, that number explodes to about 100 million people. Let that sink in. That means for every 3 people you meet, one of them is struggling in a pretty significant way. All right, let's talk money. Because when you actually run the numbers, the argument for being more targeted gets incredibly clear. So how do the costs really compare?
So check this out. To send a one-time $1,400 check to 50 million of the most vulnerable people, that would cost around $70 billion. If you expand that to the full 100 million people living in or near poverty, you're looking at about $140 billion. Now, I know, these are massive numbers, but context is everything here.
And here is where that context just becomes jaw-dropping. That targeted check for 50 million people, $70 billion. The last universal check that went out, a colossal $358 billion. The difference isn't just big, it's on a completely different planet.
Let me put that another way, because this is really the heart of the whole financial argument. For the price of that one universal check, you could send five separate checks to the 50 million people who need it the absolute most. Just imagine that. The potential for providing sustained, meaningful help is just, wow, it's on a whole other level.
But of course, anytime you talk about sending out billions of dollars, there's always that one huge question that hangs over the entire conversation, and that's inflation. What would this kind of spending actually do to the economy?
It's the critical question, right? Wouldn't pumping even $70 or $140 billion into the economy make prices spike for everyone? I mean, that's what a lot of folks think happened with the last few rounds of stimulus.
Well, the argument here is that it all comes down to how the money gets spent. People with low incomes are way more likely to use that money for immediate, essential needs. We're talking about groceries, keeping the lights on, paying for medicine, or just trying to pay down some debt. They're not running out to buy new TVs or book vacations.
So here's the crucial point. Because this money is going straight to essentials, to covering costs that already exist, it helps people stay afloat without necessarily overheating the whole economy. This analysis suggests the impacts on inflation would be negligible. That's a huge contrast to universal checks, which can definitely fuel widespread consumer spending and drive up prices.
And that really brings us to the final thought here. What we've walked through is a case built on some pretty simple math and really clear data. It suggests that by focusing our help where it's needed most, we could actually have a much bigger impact for a fraction of the cost. So the question it leaves us with is this: could this data-driven approach be the blueprint for how we handle economic support from now on?
So what would it really take for another round of stimulus checks to be sent out? It is, without a doubt, a question on millions of people's minds. And you know what? The answer might be a lot closer than you think. Today, we're going to cut through all the noise and look at the real, concrete economic signals that could actually trigger that next wave of support. Look, this is the question, right? It's probably one of the most common questions being asked right now. And if you're wondering about it, you are definitely not alone. The fact that so many people are even asking tells its own story. A lot of folks are feeling the financial squeeze. But to find the real answer, we can't just look at our own finances. We have to look somewhere else entirely. And this is the fundamental idea we have to start with. A stimulus check, sure, it feels incredibly personal. It lands right in your bank account. But where it comes from? Not personal at all. You have to think of it like a giant emergency lever the government pulls when the entire economic engine of the country starts to stall. They're not trying to fix your personal budget. They're trying to fix the country's economy. Okay, let's really break this down because this gets right to the heart of everything. On one side, you have the common assumption, which makes total sense. People are hurting, they need help, so the government should help. It's logical. But on the other side, you have the economic reality. The government really only acts when the entire economy is in trouble, when it's shrinking, when it's heading for a recession. Those stimulus checks we get are really just a side effect of that much bigger problem. The economy is the patient, and the stimulus check is the emergency medicine. So if we're going to be economic detectives, watching for these signs of weakness, where do we look first? Well, there is one single report that stands head and shoulders above all the rest. It's the most important vital sign for the U.S. economy. and that is the monthly jobs report. Every first Friday of the month, this report drops, and it's basically a national health checkup. It's the biggest barometer we've got. Now, the unemployment rate, that's the headline number everyone talks about. But the details inside are what really tell the story. You see things like average hourly earnings. Are people's wages actually keeping up with prices? And maybe the most important one is the labor participation rate. That tells us if people are so discouraged that they've just given up looking for a job altogether. Put it all together and you get a really clear picture of whether the economy is creating jobs or losing them.
I want you to just look at this number for a second. 1.8 million. It's a huge, huge figure. What in the world could that represent? Well, this number is the key to understanding why even tiny little changes in that jobs report have absolutely massive consequences.
And there it is. For every single percentage point the unemployment rate goes up, another 1.8 million people have lost their jobs. Just let that sink in. A headline might say unemployment ticked up by 0.1%. That sounds like nothing, right? But that tiny tick means 180,000 people are suddenly out of work. It's not just a statistic. It's a huge wave of disruption hitting families and towns all across the country. And that disruption, it doesn't stop there.
This is where we see the snowball effect. It's what economists call a vicious cycle. You see, a weak job market isn't just a one-time thing. It's the start of a chain reaction that can pull the whole economy down. It starts out pretty slow, but believe me, it picks up speed really, really fast.
Let's walk through this dangerous cycle. So first, the unemployment rate starts to climb. What happens next? Well, naturally, when people lose their paychecks, they stop spending money. So step 2, consumer spending falls. People put off buying that car or fixing the roof or even just eating out. Then, because customers aren't buying, businesses see their sales drop. So step 3, they contract. They cut back, they cancel plans, and eventually they have to do more layoffs. And that, of course, leads to step 4, pushing the unemployment rate even higher. You see how this works? The cycle just keeps feeding on itself, getting worse each time around.
This quote just captures it perfectly. The government is watching this cycle gain speed and momentum. They know that once it really gets going, it's incredibly hard to stop. And that exact moment, when that cycle is threatening to spiral, that's when stimulus checks go from being a vague idea to an urgent plan. The whole point of a stimulus check is to jump right into step 2, to boost consumer spending and try to break that cycle before it gets any worse.
So the jobs report is signal number 1 for sure. But there's another really crucial indicator that tells the same story: what the Federal Reserve is doing with interest rates. Watching the Fed gives us a peek behind the curtain at their private assessment of how the economy is really doing.
It's really a tale of 2 different approaches. When the economy is running hot and growing fast, the Fed worries about inflation. So they raise interest rates to make borrowing money more expensive, which kind of cools everything down. But the opposite is also true. When the Fed starts cutting interest rates, that is a crystal clear signal that they think the economy is weak and needs a boost. They're making it cheaper to borrow money to try and get businesses and people spending again.
And this brings us to a super important rule of thumb. When you see the Federal Reserve start aggressively cutting interest rates, even if officials are on TV saying the economy is strong, you need to pay attention to what they do, not what they say. Those rate cuts are a hidden signal. They're a quiet admission that behind the scenes, the data they're looking at is worrying enough to step in. They're trying to get ahead of a bigger problem.
And you know, this isn't just some abstract theory. This link between a weak economy and a big government response is a very well-established pattern. In fact, if you look back at every major recession we've had in recent memory, the playbook is remarkably consistent.
I mean, the historical record here is undeniable. In 2001, after the tech bubble popped, boom, we got stimulus checks. In 2008, during the Great Financial Crisis, boom, stimulus checks. And in 2020, when the pandemic started, boom, we got multiple rounds of stimulus checks. Every single major economic downturn in the last 25 years has been met with the exact same response. It's just become a standard tool in the economic toolkit. This quote from one of the sources just says it all, doesn't it? The response is predictable. When the economy hits a major wall, rising unemployment, shrinking growth, the government and the Fed act. They cut interest rates and they send out money. History shows us this isn't really an if question anymore. It's a when question.
Now, a lot of us think the government is just too slow to react. But when a real crisis hits, they can move with incredible speed. Let's just look at the example from late 2020. A stimulus bill was signed into law on December 28th. The very next day, December 29th, direct deposits were already starting to hit people's bank accounts. Within a week, almost everyone had their money.
The point is, the system is already built. When they decide to turn on the faucet, the money can flow almost immediately.
So, this really brings us to the ultimate takeaway. We need to shift how we think about this. The real question isn't if the government will do this again. History tells us they will. The real question is, what's the pain threshold? How bad does the economy have to get? How high does unemployment have to climb before they're finally forced to pull that lever one more time?
By understanding these signals, the jobs report, what the Fed is doing, the historical pattern, you're now equipped to watch the economy for yourself. So the next time you see a headline about the unemployment rate ticking up, you'll know it isn't just a number, it's a signal. And the real question is, how many more of those signals will we need to see before action becomes inevitable?
You know, this quote, it just hits home, doesn't it? It's a feeling so many people share. You wait all year for that cost of living adjustment, you're hoping it'll finally give you some breathing room, and then, poof, rising costs have already eaten it up before you even get it. It's this incredibly frustrating cycle, and it's the exact problem that these proposals are trying to fix.
So, to make this all super clear, here's how we're going to break it down. First, we'll look at the financial squeeze that's making all of this so necessary. Then we'll get into two huge proposals for a Social Security lifeline. After that, we'll see the plan for fixing that annual raise. Then we'll cover some other really critical help that's on the table. And finally, we'll wrap it all up and talk about what this could really mean for you.
So, let's start right there with the core issue, the financial squeeze. I mean, why does it feel like you're running backwards, even when you technically get a raise every year? Well, the numbers, they tell a pretty clear story. This all comes down to something called purchasing power. And it's not about the dollar amount printed on your check. It's about what those dollars can actually buy. Losing 20% is, well, it's staggering. It means that the same amount of money that bought you 5 bags of groceries 10 years ago might only get you 4 bags today. It's this slow, quiet erosion of your money's value, and it's the big problem that really needs a solution.
And here is where you can see the problem in black and white. You might get, say, a 2.5% cost of living adjustment, your COLA, but then a huge, essential expense like your Medicare Part B premium can jump up by 6.6%. The math is simple, and it's brutal. When your biggest costs are rising almost 3 times faster than your income, you are losing ground. Every single year. It's exactly why so many people feel like they just can't catch a break.
So, the big question is, how do we fix this? Let's get into the first set of solutions. 2 major bills have been introduced in Congress that aim to provide a direct lifeline by seriously boosting Social Security payments. And we're not talking about minor tweaks here. These are substantial increases.
Okay, so the first one is called the Social Security Expansion Act. The 2 key words to focus on here are immediate and across the board. This isn't something you'd have to wait years for, and it's not something that only applies to a small group of people. The whole point is to provide universal, fast relief to fight back against inflation.
So what does that look like in real dollars? Well, the Act proposes a direct increase of $200. It's not a complicated percentage or a formula you have to figure out, just a flat, straightforward boost right in your monthly check.
And let's be crystal clear about this. This is not a one-time stimulus payment. We're talking about an extra $200 every single month. And this would apply to everyone receiving Social Security benefits. That includes retirement, disability, spousal, and survivor benefits. I mean, when you compare that to a recent COLA that might have only been about $40 or $50 for many people, you really see just how significant this is.
And if you zoom out and look at it over a full year, the impact is even bigger. An extra $200 a month? That adds up to $2,400 over the course of a year. For anyone on a tight budget, that kind of money isn't just helpful, it's transformational. That could be several months of prescriptions paid for. It could cover an unexpected car repair. Or it could simply mean less stress and not having to choose between paying the utility bill or buying groceries. Okay, so that's the first big proposal. Now the second one is called the Social Security 2100 Act. While the Expansion Act is for everybody, this one is much more targeted. It's designed as a real lifeline for the people who are struggling the most, the folks who are currently getting the absolute minimum Social Security benefit. And the increase being proposed here, it is massive. This act would provide a $660 increase. For those on the lowest rung of the Social Security ladder, an amount like this, it's not just helpful, it's absolutely life-changing. It's a direct injection of funds aimed squarely at the most financially vulnerable people.
So what's the logic behind that $660 number? Well, it has a very specific goal, to lift recipients up to 125% of the federal poverty level. See, there are many seniors out there getting a check for around $900 a month, just trying to scrape by. This permanent increase is designed to give them not just a little relief, but a real measure of financial stability and dignity.
Okay, so those were the big, immediate boosts to your check. But what about fixing that underlying problem? You know, the annual raise that never seems to be enough? Well, that brings us to the second major type of proposal, creating a stronger, more reliable cost of living adjustment, or COLA.
The proposed solution is actually pretty simple. Set a new baseline. So while a recent COLA might have been 2.5%, one proposal would establish a minimum COLA of 3.5%. That word minimum is the key. It means your annual adjustment could never, ever fall below that number. It would create a protective floor, a safety net, to make sure your benefits have a much better chance of actually keeping up with real-world inflation.
Now, beyond direct cash payments, there are also some really crucial proposals on the table to help with two of the most fundamental needs we all have: food and health. These changes are designed to address some very specific frustrations and gaps in the current system.
This proposal takes on two major frustrations with the food stamp program, also known as SNAP. First up is the minimum payment. Right now, the minimum is just $23 a month, which, let's be honest, often doesn't even feel worth the paperwork. The idea is to raise that to $75, which would provide much more meaningful help. Second is the asset limit. The current limit can disqualify you for having as little as $4,500 in savings, basically penalizing you for having a small emergency fund. The proposal would more than double that limit to $10,000.
So, why make these specific changes? Well, the goal is pretty straightforward: to encourage more people to get the help that they're already entitled to. The estimates are kind of shocking. About 5 million seniors are eligible for food stamps, but they don't apply. And it's often because the benefit seems too small, or they're afraid of being penalized for the modest savings they've worked their whole lives for. These proposals are designed to get rid of those barriers.
Okay, we have covered a lot of ground and a lot of different numbers, so let's pull it all together right now and just summarize what this collection of proposals could tangibly mean for you and for your finances.
So let's just recap the biggest proposals on the table. We've got a potential $200 per month universal boost to Social Security, a massive $660 monthly increase for those on the minimum benefit, a guaranteed floor of 3.5% for your annual raise, and a more substantial minimum food stamp benefit of $75. Put it all together, and you see a multifaceted approach to providing real, tangible financial relief.
You know, at the end of the day, these proposals go way beyond just dollars and cents. They're about providing security and dignity and peace of mind. All of these bills are currently being debated, and they represent a potential future with a lot more financial breathing room, which really just leaves us with one final thought to consider for yourself.
Today, we're diving into a really huge idea that's being debated for the future of Social Security. We're talking about a proposal that could completely reshape the monthly checks for millions of people. And believe it or not, it all comes down to just one number: $1,304. Now, that is not some random figure pulled out of a hat. This is the heart of a major proposal for a new monthly minimum benefit for every single person on Social Security. So what would that actually mean? Who would it help? And the big one, could it even work? Come on, let's break it all down. All right, so here's our game plan. We're going to start with the problem, why this idea is even on the table. Then we'll get into the weeds of the 1304 proposal itself. We'll look at two very different ways it could work, tackle that giant funding question, and then wrap up with a reality check on where things really stand today. Okay, so let's jump right in. To really get why a number like $1,304 is such a big deal, we have to first understand the pretty stark reality that a lot of people in Social Security are facing every single day. Yeah. Just look at that number, 10.8 million. That's how many people receiving Social Security benefits are living below the poverty line. And get this, that's often after you count any other income they might have. So this right here, this is the core problem that is people scrambling for a really big solution. So this federal poverty line isn't just some abstract idea. It's a hard number. For 2025, it's pegged at $15,650 a year for a single person. And if you pull out your calculator and divide that by 12 months, yep, you get $1,304 a month. That figure is the absolute rock bottom minimum the government says you need for necessities, and it's at the very center of this whole debate. And that leads us right to the proposal itself. I mean, the logic is pretty straightforward, right? If we know millions of people are living below this very specific income level, the idea being floated is simple. Why not just use Social Security to fix it directly? So the heart of the idea is to create a brand new, hard floor for benefits. It's pretty simple. No matter your work history, no matter how much you paid in, your monthly Social Security check would never be less than the poverty line. It would basically be a guarantee. Now, to see just how massive a change this would be, you gotta see what the current minimum looks like. No,
That is not a typo. Believe it or not, the current special minimum benefit can be as low as $50 a month. 50. I mean, that barely gets you a full tank of gas, let alone a week's worth of groceries. It provides almost no real security, and that's the basement level we're starting from. So the idea is to go from a minimum of maybe $50 to a minimum of over $1,300. That isn't just a small tweak, that's a seismic shift. For anyone at the lowest end of the benefit scale, this would be absolutely life-altering. But, and you knew there was a but coming, this is where it all gets a little more complicated. Agreeing that $1,304 sounds good is one thing. Figuring out how to actually do it is way harder. And right now, there are two really different visions for how it could be done. Okay, so on one side, you have the minimum benefit approach. Think of it like a safety net. If your current benefit is, say, $900 a month, this plan would boost it up to $1,304. Simple. But if you're already getting $1,800, nothing changes for you. It just helps the lowest earners. Now, on the other side is the much more radical flat benefit idea. This would set everyone's benefit, no matter who you are, to exactly $1,304. So that person at $900 goes up, but the person getting $1,800, their benefit would actually get cut. And that flat benefit approach, wow, that would fundamentally transform the entire system. For its whole history, Social Security has been based on this idea. What you get out is linked to what you paid in. A flat benefit would completely sever that link. It would basically turn Social Security into a guaranteed basic income for more than 70 million Americans, where everybody gets the exact same check. And this is why that flat benefit idea is, well, so controversial. Sure, it would be a huge help to people at the very bottom, but it would mean a massive pay cut for millions of others. Right now, the average retirement benefit is just under $2,000 a month. So under a flat benefit plan, the average retiree would suddenly see their payment drop by nearly $700. Can you imagine telling people who planned their entire retirement around a certain income that it's about to be slashed? Yeah, the political opposition would be enormous, which is why most people see this version as pretty much a non-starter. So let's put that flat benefit idea aside for a second and just focus on the more popular version, just lifting up the lowest earners. Even with that more modest plan, we still slam into the biggest question of all. How in the world do you pay for it? Yeah, this is the multi-trillion-dollar question. Raising benefits for millions of people isn't free. It would cost a staggering amount of money, and right now, nobody really agrees on where that money should come from. It's almost always the hardest part of the puzzle to solve. Well, one idea that gets thrown around is to look at the Social Security Trust Fund itself. It's got about $2.7 trillion in it, but it's invested super conservatively, so it's only getting back about a 2.4% return. Some people argue that if we invested that money a little more strategically, we could generate billions more in revenue without raising taxes on anybody. But of course, a strategy like that comes with a whole new set of risks and a whole lot of heated debate. So, after all this talk about poverty lines, different visions, and where to find the money, where do things actually stand today? It's really important we do a reality check on whether any of this is actually close to happening. And the honest-to-goodness reality is that right now, these are all just ideas. There are a ton of proposals floating around Washington, but there isn't one single piece of legislation that has broad support. You know, a lot of observers say the concerning thing isn't just that this specific plan isn't moving forward, but that there's no unified plan for the future of Social Security at all. So what's the most important thing to take away from all this? Well, even if the $1,304 plan doesn't become law tomorrow, the fact that we're even having this conversation is huge. It tells us that the debate around Social Security is changing. The focus is starting to shift from seeing it as just a retirement program to seeing it as a powerful tool we could use to fight poverty head-on and provide a real financial safety net. And that really leaves us with this one fundamental question. For decades, we've thought of Social Security as an earned benefit. You work, you pay in, and you get it back. But should its main purpose evolve? Should its number one job be to make sure no senior, no person with a disability has to live in poverty, no matter what they earned in the past? The answer to that question is going to define the future of Social Security for generations to come. You know, there's a question that just keeps popping up, and I see it everywhere. Are we going to get a fourth stimulus check? It's a huge topic online, and honestly, for very good reason. So today, we're going to cut through all that noise and really look at what the economy itself is telling us. So let's just get right to it. This is the question on everybody's mind. And listen, while there's tons of speculation out there, the real answer isn't buried in some political headline. Nope. It's found in the economic data. And that's not an exaggeration. We're talking about this today because for millions of people who are really feeling the financial squeeze, this isn't just some abstract idea. It's a very real daily concern. So let's try to get some real clarity.
All right, here's how we're going to break this all down. We'll start with what actually triggers these payments. Then we'll look at a pretty surprising pattern from the past. After that, we'll zero in on the one economic number you need to keep an eye on. And finally, we'll talk about why the next stimulus might look totally different from the last one. Okay, first things first. What actually causes a stimulus check to happen in the first place? It's not random, and it's not just politics. It is a direct, calculated response to one specific event, an economy that's gotten sick. And when we say the economy is sick, we're really talking about a recession. That's the official word for it, right? A major, widespread, and kind of prolonged downturn that hits everything and everyone, from big corporations to your local coffee shop. And this right here is the core idea we need to understand. If you just look back at the last couple of decades, the pattern is crystal clear. Every single major recession has been followed by stimulus checks. Every single time. It's basically become a standard move in the modern economic playbook. Here's a great way to think about it. Imagine the economy is a patient. A recession? That's when the patient gets seriously ill. The lawmakers are the doctors, and their go-to prescription is a big old injection of cash. That's the stimulus, to try and get the patient back up and running. And it makes sense, right? The sicker the patient, the bigger the dose of medicine they're going to need. So let's dig into that history a little bit, because when you actually examine the numbers from past recessions, well, a really fascinating and maybe even predictive pattern starts to show up. Okay, check this out. Back in 2001, after the dot-com bubble burst, the check was for $300. Then in 2008, during that massive financial crisis, it doubled to $600. And then in 2020, with the pandemic, it doubled again to $1,200. Are you seeing the pattern here? Now, if you just follow that doubling logic, the next number in that sequence would be around $2,400. But, and I have to be super clear about this is just an observation of a historical trend. It is absolutely not a guarantee. The actual amount of any future check would depend completely on how severe the economic downturn is at the time. So if a sick economy is the trigger, how do we know when it's sick enough for the doctors to step in? Well, there's one key health report that we can all look at. It comes out on the first Friday of every single month, and it's simply called the Jobs Report. And inside this report, there are a few vital signs. You've got the headline number, the unemployment rate. But just as important is jobs created or lost. Are companies hiring, or are they laying people off? The labor participation rate tells us how many people are even trying to find a job, and average hourly earnings shows if our paychecks are keeping pace with inflation. Altogether, they paint a pretty clear picture of our economic health. So when you start to see that businesses, from the giant corporations all the way down to your local pizzeria, are slowing down their hiring, or worse, starting to let people go, that is a massive warning flare for the whole economy. It means people aren't spending as much, companies are getting nervous, and the whole economic engine is starting to sputter. That is the signal that gets lawmakers to scramble and start seriously talking about what they need to do. But, and this is really important, if they do act again, there's a good chance it won't be a carbon copy of last time. The whole strategy could shift to something much more targeted. See, the last few checks were broad. They went out to a massive chunk of the population. A targeted strategy is different. It would focus laser-like on low-income and fixed-income households. Why? Because those are the folks most likely to spend the money immediately and pump it right back into the economy. This gives you way more bang for your buck, and it does it with less risk of driving up inflation for everybody else. So the big takeaway here is this. We might need to adjust our expectations. If and when another stimulus package comes along, it could be designed very, very differently. Maybe aimed at a smaller group of people to get the maximum economic impact with the fewest negative side effects. Okay, so let's just trace that path one more time. It starts with an economic contraction. We see it in those bad jobs reports. That triggers the lawmakers' scramble, where they have to respond. Then a stimulus package is passed, and finally, the payments are distributed with one single goal: to get spent right away and kickstart the economy. So that brings us to the final thought. Based on modern history, it really doesn't seem to be a matter of if the government will intervene in the next major recession. The real question is, how sick does the economy have to get before they open up that playbook once again? That's what we'll all be watching.
Okay, so you've probably seen this number making the rounds online. a massive 20.3% raise for Social Security beneficiaries. I mean, it's the kind of number that sounds incredible, almost too good to be true, right? It could be absolutely life-changing for millions, but where did it even come from? Is it a real proposal? Is it some kind of back payment plan? Or is it just a big misunderstanding? Today, we are going to get to the bottom of it. We're going to decode that number and figure out what it really means.
And that brings us to the big question, the one that's on everybody's mind. Is a 20.3% raise for Social Security actually on the table for 2025? It's a really powerful idea, especially with how expensive everything has gotten for folks on a fixed income. Before we break it all down, just take a second and think, what would a raise that big mean for you? For your monthly budget, your peace of mind, your ability to just handle things? It's a powerful thought. So let's dig in and find out what's really going on here.
So let's turn that percentage into actual dollars, because that's what really matters. For the average SSI beneficiary, we're talking about an extra $200 per month. Think about that for a second. That's not just a number. That's a full tank of gas and groceries, or a utility bill paid off with less stress.
Now, for SSDI beneficiaries, that number jumps even higher to an extra $300 a month. I mean, that's a really significant boost that could help cover things like medical copays or just give you a little bit of breathing room in your budget.
And for the average retired worker, the increase would be even bigger, about $380 more every single month. If you stretch that out over a year, that's nearly $4,600. So yeah, it is no wonder a number like 20.3% got everyone's attention. It's huge.
With figures like these, you have to ask, is this for real? Is it a real possibility? Well, to find out, we have to understand where that 20.3% number actually came from in the first place.
Okay, this is the key to the whole story. That 20.3% didn't just appear out of thin air. It's actually rooted in real data from the Social Security Administration. But, and this is a big but, it's the interpretation of that data that's caused all this excitement and confusion. So let's peel back the layers and actually look at the math behind the headline.
All right, let's dive in and really deconstruct this number. In this section, we're going to trace that 20.3% right back to its source. And, spoiler alert, it is not a proposed bill for a new raise, and it's not a retroactive payment plan that's being debated in Congress. The truth is actually a lot simpler, and it has everything to do with the cost of living adjustments. You know, the COLAs that have already been paid out.
So here's where it comes from. It's actually simple math. If we look at the official cost of living adjustments over the last few years, in 2022, we got a 5.9% raise. Then in 2023, that huge 8.7% increase. For 2024, it was 3.2%. And if we add a projected 2.5% for 2025, what do you get when you add all that up? You got it, exactly 20.3%.
And that's the big aha moment right there. The 20.3% figure is not a new proposal for a one-time check. It is the cumulative total of the annual COLA increases from 2022 all the way through the projection for 2025. It's a way of measuring how much benefits have already gone up during a period of really high inflation. So it's not a future promise, it's more like a look in the rearview mirror.
But that raises a really important question. If 20.3% is just the sum of old raises, why is everyone talking about back pay? Well, the answer is in the gap between those official COLA numbers and the reality of what things actually cost.
And this right here, this is the heart of the issue. While benefits have gone up by that 20.3% over 4 years, just look at what's happened to prices. The cost of groceries has jumped somewhere between 22 and 25% in that same time. And utilities like electricity and gas, whoa, that increase is staggering, anywhere from 28 to as high as 40%. It's plain to see the official raises just haven't kept up.
And you know, the financial pressure doesn't just stop with food and utilities. The cost of shelter, whether it's rent or a mortgage, has just skyrocketed. And medical expenses have seen a huge jump too. We're talking higher copays every time you see a doctor and rising premiums for insurance. When you put it all together, it's pretty clear that even with that 20.3% cumulative raise, the actual purchasing power of your benefit has gone down.
So, this all leads to the next logical question. If there's such a clear gap between the COLAs and the actual cost of living, why not just pass a law to give everyone a retroactive payment to make up for it? That's the whole idea behind this back pay concept. But, as good as it might sound, there are some pretty big political and financial hurdles that make a plan like that extremely unlikely to ever happen.
Let's just walk through the reality here. First, any kind of payment like this would need a brand new law passed by both the House and the Senate. That's a huge challenge right there.
The president can't just sign an executive order and make it happen. Plus, and this is a really big one for lawmakers, pumping that much cash into the system would make Social Security's financial problems happen a lot sooner. And finally, it's just important to